In the Planescape campaign setting for D&D, there are 17 outer planes, which are essentially the realms of D&D's afterlife. There's one for each moral alignment, ranging from lawful evil to chaotic good and everything in between. I've already covered the planes of lawful good, chaotic evil, neutral lawful good, and lawful neutral in depth, as well as Sigil, the city that sits at the center of the outer planes. In this video, I'll be covering the plane of chaotic good, the Olympian glades of Arborea. I'll be using sources from all editions of D&D, but as usual, most of it comes from the Planescape books of 2nd edition. If you're one of those people that doesn't like my musings on philosophy, don't worry, there are timestamps to skip through. That most often comes up in the next section of these videos, the morality section, but I found that there are actually a few things about Arborea that are morally questionable that I felt it made more sense to discuss when they come up, rather than all up front. So if you want to skip those, keep an eye out for time codes on the screen during those parts. But before we get to that section, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters. Each new patron helps to bring these videos closer to being worth the time investment I put into them. So if you'd like to support what I do, then check out my Patreon, where you'll get to vote on videos, you'll get access to ad-free videos, you'll get audio-only versions of my videos several weeks early, and you'll get your name in each of my videos. But if you'd like to support me and get something physical out of it, then consider visiting this video's sponsor, DiceNest.com. DiceNest makes luxury handcrafted dice. You can find dice made out of gemstone, resin, metal, wood, and even some wood resin blends. For my last video, DiceNest sent me a free set of dice of my choice from their website, and I liked them a lot. For this video, they did the same thing again. This time, my choice was the Spectrum Mysterious Agate dice in purple, and this is what they look like. I've seen a lot of dice in my time playing D&D and other TTRPGs, but I don't often see D4 like this. Barrel D4, they're called. They're much more readable than the standard D4 shape. The other dice in the sets also look and feel great. So now, thanks to DiceNest, I've got 2 sets of really high-end, high-quality dice. They feel weighty, and they usually draw the eye of everyone at the table. So if you'd like some cool dice of your own, visit DiceNest.com and use my affiliate code WadeAllen for 15% off your order, and I'll earn 15% on all purchases that use my code. Though I will warn you that they're not cheap. They are luxury dice after all. But anyway, let's get on with the tour of Arborea. Arborea is the plane of chaotic good. So what does it mean to be chaotic good? First, let's briefly look at chaos and good individually, then we'll look at what the various editions have to say about the combination. I've already covered what it means to be chaotic in my Guide to the Abyss video, but I'll just remind you that chaotic doesn't necessarily mean random. It could mean that a character like Two-Face, who decides all decisions based on a coin flip, is certainly chaotic, but chaos encompasses more than that. Earlier editions of D&D emphasize the randomness components of chaos more than later editions do. Chaos means individuality and unpredictability, and generally the rejection of order and law. But it's important to keep in mind that, perhaps unexpectedly, chaotic characters sometimes do behave lawfully, such as by existing in a rigid hierarchy or by following some laws, or in the case of the Arboreans, engaging in ritualized behaviors and following traditional codes of conduct. I suppose it's just unrealistic to expect any given chaotic character to behave chaotically on all fronts all the time. Good in D&D generally means acting selflessly, while evil entails selfishness. Though of course this too fluctuates from edition to edition. Sometimes it's more about helping versus harming. So what about chaotic good? In 1st edition AD&D, chaotic good characters believe in the inherent randomness of the multiverse and value freedom and individualism, but they also place great value on life and the welfare of every individual. In 2nd edition AD&D, which perhaps we should pay the most attention to because this is the edition that Planescape was made for, chaotic good characters are strong individualists marked by a streak of kindness and benevolence. They believe in the importance of goodness, but have little use for laws and regulations. They're guided by their own moral compass, which means that while they are ultimately helping others and making the world a better place, they may be at odds with the rest of society. The 3rd edition definition of chaotic good basically just repeats the 2nd edition one. Chaotic good characters hate when people try to intimidate others and tell them what to do. They combine a good heart with a free spirit. 4th edition completely removes chaotic good as an alignment, in many ways reverting back to the ways of pre-AD&D, where alignment only has one axis, and chaos is evil. And, as always, 5th edition offers an extremely pared down definition, so pared down that it actually becomes misleading, which is potentially worse than useless. It says that chaotic good characters act as their conscience directs, with little regard for what others expect. That's a sentence taken straight from 3rd edition, but 3rd edition contextualized that statement with a paragraph about how chaotic good characters are actually good. But you'll notice that the 5th edition definition doesn't do this. So if your conscience directs you to kill the innocent, and you do it, well, that's chaotic good according to 5th edition. Absolute trash. The 2024 rulebook does a little better by giving an example of chaotic good behavior. So, chaotic good characters are rebels who treat others with kindness and strive to make the world a better place in their own way, disregarding what society has to say. Perhaps the most obvious example of a chaotic good character is Robin Hood. But if you think about it, wouldn't Batman be chaotic good? After all, he is a vigilante, so he's flouting the laws of society at every turn, opting to follow his own path. But does that seem right? In a previous video or two, I talked about how lawfulness can mean following a personal code, which Batman certainly does. But what's really the difference between following a personal code and following your own moral compass? Is it perhaps the idea that the personal code is consistent and rigid, while your moral compass can move? But Robin Hood lives by a code too. Him and Batman seem like pretty similar characters, except for the fact that Batman is hoarding wealth. But a minor note on Robin Hood is that some people think he's actually better characterized as neutral good, because of course while he rejects King John and actively opposes him, he supports King Richard the Lionheart. So he would only be chaotic and against the law from the perspective of King John. Anyway, it seems like there's a conundrum here between lawful good encompassing personal codes and the independent moral compass of chaotic good. I feel like they're more or less the same thing. Perhaps thinking of the law-chaos axis purely in terms of one's relationship with society fixes it, as then anyone who rejects society's norms in favor of their own code or conscience lands on the chaotic side of things. But without doing that, there's this strange overlap between law and chaos that I think causes chaos to lose too much ground, as it then only admits the people who follow a moral compass too inconsistent and unpredictable to be called a code, which you've got to figure is much less common. Though if we want to tease apart an overlap between chaos and law, we also have to leave room for neutrality. So another way it could work is if lawful good types follow the laws of society, neutral good types follow their own code, and chaotic good types follow their own unpredictable moral compass. Although that still doesn't really work, because there is a problem with lawfulness being about following the laws of society, as I've remarked upon in previous videos. For example, if you're lawful good, but your society is evil, then you're either doing evil to conform to your society, which would strip you of your goodness, or you're rebelling against your society, which would strip you of your lawfulness. So it's obviously not just about your relationship to the society you live in. I think a better way to put it is whether you're in favor of rules for others or not. That way you could be lawful good and rebel against the evil society you live in, but you're still lawful good because you still believe in order, that there should be a set of societally held rules that everyone must obey, just not these particular rules. So with that framework, a chaotic good character can have just as much of a personal code as a lawful good character. The difference is that the lawful good character would like to see everyone live by that code, where the chaotic character thinks that every individual should find their own code to live by, which I think does swing Robin Hood back to chaotic good. While he himself supports Richard the Lionheart, he does ultimately support the individual's ability to decide on their own code to live by. Looking at it this way, being chaotic is really just being radically pro-freedom, which, of course, agrees with the 2nd and 3rd edition definitions. Sometimes I feel like I'm unraveling the alignment system one problem at a time with these videos, as so often when I think about it from a new angle, I'd find something that doesn't make sense. But sometimes it does make sense if you just think about it a bit longer. I imagine that these are the types of things that the philosophers of the Outer Planes debates all the time. But there is a whole other problem with the morality of Arborea. Actually, several, but I'll get to them later. As is sometimes the case, the description of a plane's alignment doesn't completely align with the behavior of its inhabitants. There's often another layer to it, something that gives the plane a unique quality on top of its alignment that has to be reconciled with the alignment itself. For instance, the Bitopians are good, but are also quid pro quo capitalists. The inhabitants of the Grey Wastes are evil, but are also completely apathetic. Likewise, the Arboreans are good, but they're also unremitting hedonists. So the question is, how can hedonism be good? Hedonism, if you don't know, is the egoistic pursuit of pleasure. Okay, that's technically not true, but that's the colloquial understanding of the word. Philosophical hedonism is different and larger and more complex, and I'll get into that in a bit. First, I'll just consider the pejorative version of hedonism, known as folk hedonism. Because, honestly, I get the sense from reading the Arborea section in this book that this is the version of hedonism that the writers had in mind. The Arboreans live lives of pleasure, quick fixes, and no restraint. They spend all their time partying, drinking, dancing, feasting, singing, fighting, making art, and presumably all sorts of other things that the books are too tame to mention explicitly, such as having wild orgies. Chalk that up to the prudishness of this country, I guess. This country being the one in which the books were written, of course, as well as the one I live. In fact, the books were written in the same state that I live in. But anyway, this short-term gratification, self-centered folk hedonism would seem to me to be at least somewhat incompatible with goodness. After all, goodness is largely defined by selflessness, and folk hedonism is highly selfish. Perhaps it's not that hedonism is good, but it's the reward for being good in life. Though that would mean that, unlike most other planes, the denizens of Arborea don't themselves reflect the morality of the plane whatsoever. They used to, and that's how they got there, but they don't anymore. But because morality has physical consequences for the outer planes, for that idea to work, there would have to be more people in Arborea who really do embody the alignment of the plane for it to avoid cosmic realignment. So it's not the most compelling idea. But hedonism doesn't necessarily have to be defined by selfishness. You could very well imagine someone who's constantly seeking pleasure, but not at the expense of others, and even further, sharing their pleasure-filled experiences with others, if for no other reason than they find it more pleasurable to involve other people, which is a step closer to philosophical hedonism. So perhaps rather than a plane full of selfish crack addicts, basically, it's a place characterized equally by the seeking and sharing of pleasure. Although, to counter that, there are times when the hedonism of the Arboreans is described as a destructive thing, pleasure at the expense of others, particularly with the Bacchae, who I'll describe later. But if only a minority of Arboreans exhibit this destructive hedonism, while the rest are supporting the happiness of others as well as themselves, then I think it can work. But maybe, despite what I think the writers intended, the Arboreans adopt a more philosophical notion of hedonism. In philosophy, there are multiple types of hedonism. There's psychological hedonism, axiological hedonism, and ethical hedonism, potentially with soft and hard versions of each of these. Psychological hedonism, also called motivational hedonism, is the claim that we are motivated by pleasure and pain. Hard psychological hedonism would say that we are only motivated by pleasure and pain, whereas soft psychological hedonism would say that there may be other motivators, but pleasure and pain are the primary ones. I'm open to the idea that there may be other motivators, though I'm not sure what they would be. But I think at the very least, soft psychological hedonism is true, especially when you consider that the philosophical notion of pleasure is rather broad. It's not just about physical sensations, like tasting something delicious or having an orgasm. It also encompasses things like lifetime satisfaction and contentment, which means that it's not just about immediate gratification or the type of pleasure seeking that ultimately causes long-term unhappiness. It can also include trying to find meaning in your life, or doing things that cause a little bit of displeasure in the short term for a larger amount of pleasure in the long term, or to avoid an even larger amount of displeasure in the long term, like going to the dentist. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy doesn't distinguish between axiological hedonism and ethical hedonism, which makes enough sense because they're quite similar. Axiological hedonism is the idea that pleasure is the only thing with intrinsic value. In other words, the value of anything boils down to how much pleasure you derive from it. Or perhaps a better way of putting it is that it boils down to how favorable the pleasure-to-pain ratio is. After all, you'd probably pass up on something that provides immense pleasure but an equal amount of pain. And it should be noted that pain is also being used in the broad sense, encompassing not only physical sensations of pain but also despair and annoyance and so on. Hard axiological hedonism is the default if you're an axiological hedonist, as you certainly can take a soft position that pleasure isn't the only thing with intrinsic value, just the primary thing, but in most circles that would label you less as a hedonist and more as a value pluralist. Though I do think it makes sense to distinguish them, because saying I'm a soft axiological hedonist says a little bit more about you than I'm a value pluralist. Because a value pluralist could believe that the various values they believe in all have equal weight, or that there are one or several sources of intrinsic value that hold more weight than pleasure, or even that pleasure isn't one of the values at all. Ethical hedonism is the idea that the moral goodness of an act is derived from the pleasure it produces. So, yeah, basically the same thing as axiological hedonism. If you'd want to say that they're different, then you'd have to say that there's a meaningful difference between something having intrinsic value and something being good. Which you could do. I just think that might require adopting a different definition of the word value than what is used in ethics, as goodness is pretty much wrapped up in value. But then within ethical hedonism, there's two more types, egoistic and non-egoistic, or utilitarian hedonism. The first idea is much more closely aligned with folk hedonism, though not necessarily focused on short-term gratification at the expense of long-term happiness. It's the idea that one should only be concerned with producing pleasure for themselves. The second idea is that everyone's happiness matters and must be considered to determine what is good. So all of this is to say that it's entirely possible, albeit unlikely given the source material, that this is the type of hedonism that the Arboreans exhibit. Sure, they party and live wild lives of reckless abandon, but they're committed to making sure everyone else is enjoying themselves as well. And actually, I do think there's a logical path from egoistic hedonism to utilitarian hedonism. I do think there's a way in which you can be motivated by self-interest while improving and caring for the world around you. For instance, I take joy in nature's beauty, so litter makes me unhappy, motivating me to not litter and to clean up litter, increasing my own happiness, but also the happiness of others. If you can manage to acknowledge the interconnectedness of the world around you and how one person's bad day can affect another's and eventually affect you, you can widen your sense of self or your circle of concern so that you don't just care about when something negatively impacts you personally, or your family, or your friends, or your tribe, but the entire world. Then your selfishness will start to look very much like selflessness. Maybe this is the perspective of the Arboreans. Maybe. Arborea is a plane that's larger than life. Well, everything in the Outer Planes is larger than life, but it's especially true of Arborea. And I mean that physically and emotionally. It's a plane of unrestrained passion, deep affection, violent moods, and reckless emotion, both the good and the bad, and frequent swings between. Passions burn brightly but quickly. It wouldn't be too far off the mark to say that the plane itself has bipolar disorder. In Arborea, rage is as common and honored as joy, though of course the people of Arborea are still good-natured. Whatever emotion you're feeling, the Arboreans would encourage you to embrace it and feel it deeply. But in fact, you don't really have much of a choice. You see, it's not only the natives of Arborea that act this way, but everyone who comes here. There's something about the plane, like the air is charged with electricity, that makes everyone here short-tempered, passionate, and melodramatic. The pure, wild emotion is like the opposite of the cold, calculating logic of Mechanus, though of course the two planes aren't direct opposites. The fact that Arborea makes everyone feel much more intensely brings to mind a possible inconsistency, or at least an interesting interaction with another characteristic of Arborea. Because, as I mentioned in the last section, the plane is also characterized by unfettered hedonism. At any given moment, there are few places in the plane where some sort of revelry, feast, orgy, or drunken debauchery isn't happening. But if the plane enhances all emotions, turns up the volume on everything, then you'd think that in Arborea, you'd have to do comparatively little to achieve the same levels of bliss, fun, or satisfaction during your hedonistic revelries than anywhere else. For example, the pleasure and thrill of a 30-person orgy anywhere else could be achieved in Arborea with 5 people or something. So you'd think that because of this, the hedonism of Arborea would actually be rather tame compared to anywhere else. But I guess maybe it doesn't work that way. The emotional enhancement of Arborea probably comes with a drastic increase on the maximum level of emotion you're capable of experiencing. So everything you do is multiplied to an extent that is completely impossible to achieve otherwise. So it's like, why stop at 5 people that feels like 30 when you could do 30 people that feels like 180? Or 180 that feels like 1,080? Maybe in Arborea, the returns don't diminish. So if you can feel a lot here by doing relatively little, then what would you feel by doing a lot? The Arboreans know, and they keep coming back for it. But another way that Arborea is larger than life is in its geography. Nearly everything here is giant. Giant mountains that make real-world mountains look like small hills. Giant trees, giant oceans, giant deserts, giant plains, giant canyons, giant valleys, and so on. And it's not just the size. The forests are lusher, the water is bluer, and the sky is clearer than practically anywhere else in the multiverse. But for all its beauty, the size and sheer wildness of the place makes the landscape essentially impassable in most places. I mean, you could probably do it, but climbing up and down the mountains and navigating the dense, near-endless forests to get to your destination could take years upon years. And that's if you don't get lost or eaten along the way. So, traversal is difficult. More difficult than in most other planes, just because the landscape is so extreme. Most people just opt for portals to get most of the way toward their destination. However, the settled regions of Arborea are traversable, and many of them are downright pastoral and harmless, filled with gentle rolling hills and fields, vineyards, and orchards. 3rd edition describes Arborea as a crazy quilt of climates and thriving environments. Arborea is the most bountiful of all the outer planes. You might think that to be Bytopia, but it's actually this plane. I suppose while Bytopia does produce a lot of food, it's mostly known for its crafts. Arborea is known for its food. You'll find food labeled as Arborean sold all over the Outer Planes, though a fair amount of it isn't actually from Arborea at all. Merchants just call it that so they can charge more because of Arborea's reputation for producing the highest quality stuff. No doubt the food of Arborea is very high quality, but its reputation is a bit inflated. A lot of people assume it's the best because the Society of Sensation lives in Arborea, and they know quality. But many people don't consider that the Sensates eat Arborean food because they live in Arborea, not necessarily because Arborea's got the best food. Though due to the plane's emotion-enhancing effect, it definitely does taste the best while you're in Arborea. But the plane isn't just agriculturally bountiful. The wild places are plentiful too. So if you do happen to get lost in the wild, which isn't all that unlikely, at least finding food isn't one of the things you need to worry about, as plump berries and delicious nuts and everything in between can be found easily on the bushes and trees. While the weather of Arborea is often serene, just like the violent mood swings of the people, the pleasant weather often turns into violent storms that dissipate just as unexpectedly as they came. These storms are one of the primary dangers of the plane, with deaths by lightning and hail being common. But you've also got flash floods, and I'm sure things like avalanches and landslides as well. And those aren't the only dangers. Many people assume that the upper planes are safe, even boring places, but they can actually be quite dangerous, especially the chaotic ones. In Arborea's case, you've not only got the violent weather and the unpredictable and easily provoked people, but also giant predators and other mighty creatures, as well as the capricious and jealous gods and spirits of nature to worry about. You see, Arborea is determined to stay wild and pure, meaning the plane puts up a strong resistance to environmental destruction through the fact that every nook and cranny of the landscape is inhabited by a nature spirit of some kind. So, for example, if you carve a path through an arboreal forest, which I realize is a technically redundant phrase, but the plane is called Arborea, you might get killed by a gang of dryads, or maybe they'll just change the forest around you, causing you to get hopelessly lost until something else comes along to kill you. It's a wonder how any of these settled areas ever got settled in the first place. Though I suppose most of them are within the gods' realms, who settled it themselves, or at least allow others to. The nature spirits also have a deep enmity for arsonists and those who hunt for sport. And it's not even just the destruction of nature that will get you killed, but merely offending the spirits. They're rather prickly, sometimes literally. Luckily, they can be appeased. The Arboreans are accustomed to performing rituals and leaving offerings to the spirits to avoid provoking them. The plane of Arborea has 3 layers. There's Olympus, Ossa, and Pelion, though to the elves that's Arvandor, Aqualor, and Mithardir. Olympus is home to 2 pantheons, the Greek and the Elven. The people of Arborea have a similar relationship to the gods as they do to the nature spirits, although this relationship is even more dangerous and unpredictable, as the gods seemingly don't require any provocation to kill or ruin the lives of their people. Though this is mostly true of the Greek pantheon, who I will talk a lot more about in a later section. As I've just described, the people of Arborea are intensely emotional, free-spirited, hedonistic, kind, wild, and full of joie de vivre. They're extremely changeable, going from intense joy one moment to deep sorrow or rage the next. But while the people of Arborea are generally chaotic, they do at the same time have a deep-seated lawfulness, as evidenced by their traditions and codes of conduct that no one dares violate, mostly to avoid provoking the gods and nature spirits that, just like the people, are so easily offended. As with any plane, the population is mostly a mix of planers, mortals born in the outer planes, and petitioners, mortals who died and have been sent to this plane to live out their afterlives, or more accurately, their second lives, as petitioners can die. The petitioners of Arborea are an incredibly varied bunch. Many of them are humans or elves, due to the presence of Arvandor and Olympus, the 2 biggest realms in the plane. But you can also find gnomes, centaurs, satyrs, harpies, pixies, nixies, and all sorts of other sylvan races. However, according to 3rd edition, there isn't nearly as much variance, and most of the petitioners are elves. But in any case, the petitioners are essentially the commoners of Arborea, tending to the woodlands and meadows. Normally, one of 2 fates await a petitioner: death or merging with the plane. It's generally each petitioner's greatest desire to merge with the plane or to achieve union with their god, which basically amounts to achieving perfection or enlightenment or apotheosis or something, becoming the best version of yourself, which means something different from plane to plane. In Arborea, I imagine that to be achieving something like Epicurean eudaimonia, which is the ancient Greek concept of the highest good, a combination of the maximal virtuous character and maximal happiness. Though, of course, Epicurus would say that with one comes the other. Achieving maximal virtue necessarily entails achieving maximal happiness, or vice versa. But death, too, causes a petitioner to merge with their plane, at least so long as they're in their home plane when they die. If they die outside of it, it's just obliteration. However, there's evidently something worse about merging through death compared to merging through apotheosis. My thought is that the petitioners want to add to their plane, to enhance it, to make it better by adding their life experience to its very fabric. So dying before they reach the pinnacle of their being robs them and the plane of that potential. Those are the 2 fates. I guess 3 if you consider obliteration and the death merge to be distinct fates, which I suppose they are. But in Arborea, there's one more, and I imagine it to be every petitioner's nightmare, preferable only to complete annihilation. You see, petitioners can also transform into Bacchae. I'll describe the Bacchae more in the next section, but for now you can think of it as being overtaken by an infectious disease that turns you into a half-mad Dionysian reveler, roaming the plain like a plague of locusts. It's unknown whether this transformation is actually permanent, and what happens to the Bacchae once they die, but petitioners are especially prone to the transformation. Most planes are home to one large organization or another. In Arborea, that's the Society of Sensation, also known as the Sensates. They're one of the 15 factions vying for political power within Sigil. But every faction of Sigil has a base of operations both inside the city and elsewhere. The Sensates have theirs right here in Arborea, called the Gilded Hall, and they're unusually dominant in this plane, which is to say that they have a larger presence here than most of the factions do in their home planes. The place is just too perfect and too beautiful for them to want to live anywhere else. Of course, many Sensates live in Sigil, a lot actually, and you can find Sensates elsewhere, but most of them live in Arborea. Naturally, they participate in the constant revelry of the plane, but they're also the ones who conduct most of the business in Arborea. The Factol of the Sensates is Erin Darkflame Montgomery, though as their leader, she spends the vast majority of her time in Sigil, playing the political game. And she's actually one of the two most important and powerful people in the city, the other being Duke Rowan Darkwood, the Factol of the Fated. The Sensates believe that to know the multiverse, you must experience it fully. The senses form the path to truth, for the multiverse doesn't exist beyond what can be sensed. Enlightenment is achieved through experience, and not just the good experiences. The depths of misery contain valuable insights, just as the heights of ecstasy do, perhaps even more so. But most of all, they value new experiences. Sensates are focused on living life in the here and now, making the most of each moment, and letting go of inhibition, much like Jim Carrey in the movie Yes Man. But experiences aren't just about the physical or the emotional, but the cerebral too. A true sensate understands all this. However, there are many within the ranks that are just in it for the base physical pleasures, which certainly doesn't help the Society of Sensation's reputation of being a bunch of folk hedonists. But there is an offshoot of the Society of Sensation that truly does deserve that reputation. They're the Children of the Vine, a sect of Arborea that disagree with the Sensates on the value of negative sensations, emotional or intellectual growth, and so-called perfect experiences. They believe that no urge should be suppressed, no impulse resisted, and that only through denying themselves nothing can they gain everything. Fleeting whims are given equal importance to the great ponderings of sages. They're always blissfully happy, drunk, and dancing. They're mostly comprised of satyrs, nymphs, drunks, and Bacchae, and the Children of the Vine are probably the most likely of all to willingly join the Bacchae. So what I was saying about the incompatibilities between hedonism and morality apply the most to the Children of the Vine. How can they be good if they're so obsessed with self-gratification? I suppose they must also be very kind-hearted and make the world a better place by spreading joy with the people they meet by bringing them into the party, at least for a little while. Or perhaps their moral shortcomings are outweighed by the rest of the plane. But at the very least, you can't really say that they're wasteful. A moral argument against gluttonous behavior, such as what the Children of the Vine get up to, is that they're consuming more than their fair share of the resources. But in this case, there's infinite resources. Arborea is so abundant that to gorge yourself on wine and cake or whatever isn't depriving anyone else. There's enough to go around even if everyone massively overconsumes, at least in theory, because while there may be infinite resources, there isn't necessarily a supply chain to match. Just because the resources are infinite doesn't mean they're infinitely available in all places throughout the Outer Planes. So then the moral argument would be that they're spending all their time partying and consuming this infinite supply of resources when they could be helping to disseminate it to those more in need, which is essentially the argument in Peter Singer's essay titled Famine, Affluence, and Morality. If you have money to spend on non-essentials, perhaps it's unethical to spend that money on anything other than helping others get essentials. So while I still think the morality of the Children of the Vine is suspect, I suppose you could say it's suspect in the same way that the morality of humanity is. Not that that really helps, as I think most humans would wind up in the lower planes. But you might disagree. And if you do, then perhaps you see no problem with the Children of the Vine's presence in Arborea. Just like how the geography and the emotions of this plane are larger than life, so are a lot of the creatures. It's similar to Bitopia in that there are both normal-sized creatures and gigantic versions of those same creatures, except where Bitopian animals are sapient, Arborean animals have regular animal intelligence. Another difference is that a preponderance of the animal life in Bitopia, especially the giant ones, are of the burrowing variety. Rabbits, moles, foxes, gophers, that sort of thing. There are still other, more inherently dangerous animals there, such as bears and mountain lions, of course, but in Arborea, the skew is in the opposite direction. There's an abundance of dangerous animals, both normal-sized and giant, such as lions, wolves, boars, serpents, bulls, eagles, and so on. However, they typically leave groups of people alone. Though watch out if you're by yourself or are wandering the wild places of the plane. They're gonna eat you. In addition to these animals, there are all sorts of creatures from Greek and Elven myth, monsters of legend, as they're called, like gorgons and medusas, which are different things in D&D. Not because, as is sometimes assumed, that the D&D writers are ignorant of Greek mythology, but perhaps because they know more about Greek mythology than the average person. The word gorgon is used to refer to Medusa and her sisters, yes, but it's also a name for the Libyan beast, which, funnily enough, was seemingly mistaken for a real animal in this book. Though, of course, in actual mythology there is just one Medusa, where in D&D, Medusas, or Medusae, are a type of creature. But according to this book, which does contradict this one, these monsters of legend are more numerous in the prime material plane, and there's typically only one of each type in the outer planes, the archetype for all the monsters of that sort, the biggest and the strongest, like how the Nemean lion is the legendary version of a regular lion, a unique creature that all other versions are pale reflections of. So there would only be one Medusa, the Medusa, and she's maybe somewhere in Arborea. All the rest of the Medusas that you could think of as lesser versions of her populate the prime material plane. The contradiction is that this book suggests that there are many Medusas in Arborea, as well as other monsters of legend such as chimeras, pegasi, harpies, sirens, the D&D version of sirens, cyclops, hydras, and so on. Then there are also giants and titans. These large entities were the original inhabitants of Arborea, but both have largely been displaced, though they can still be found here and there, especially in the remote regions of the plane. Giants are likely a more common find than titans are, I would assume. When the Elven pantheon came to Arborea, they challenged the giants and wrested control of their territories from them, driving most of the giants off to Isgard. The silly part is that the Elven pantheon came from Isgard, so they basically just traded places with the giants. That being said, giants can still be found in Arborea, but only one god of the giants remains in the plane. A similar story is true of the titans. Though first you should know that there are two types of titans in D&D. The ordinary titans are just the largest of the giants and are chaotic good, at least in 2nd edition. In 5th edition, titan is a creature type that encompasses a variety of quasi-deity creatures rather than a specific kind of creature. So the lesser ordinary titans would in 5th edition instead be Empyreans, which are the children of gods, not quite gods themselves. But then there are also greater titans, which are pretty much different beings entirely, and they aren't so good, at least not most of them. These are the titans of Greek myth, truly colossal entities of godly proportions and power. If normal titans are 25 feet tall, I imagine greater titans to be as tall as mountains, though perhaps not as tall as Arborean mountains. These greater titans were ousted by the Greek gods and were banished to Carcery, the prison plane. Though not all of them. There were some who stayed out of the conflict or otherwise avoided being imprisoned in Carcery and can still be found in the most savage, nearly inhospitable regions. And because the plane is infinite, there are even a few who are totally oblivious to the fact that the Titanomachy, the war between the Greek gods and titans, ever happened. There are also herds of Burak in the plains and meadows, Balena in the oceans, and Ratatosk in the forests. But in this section of my videos, I like to focus on creatures that are more representative of Arborea, So, for instance, Barak and Bolena are more numerous in Elysium, and Ratatosk are more properly related to Isgard. So I'm just going to talk about the Ezrai, Bacchae, Dryads, and Oreads. The Ezrai are chaotic water nymphs. They can be found all throughout the river Oceanus, as well as other waters of Arborea and the neighboring plains. Ezrai are beautiful, 4-foot-tall females with extremely long, twisting, twining hair. They travel in schools like fish, and speak the languages of many sea creatures, though they don't often speak, except to hurl insults at creatures larger than them. A school of Ezrai can hypnotize their enemies by swimming in unison, creating mesmerizing patterns with the movement of their bodies and their weaving hair. Ezrai melt away like ice when exposed to sunlight, and so they're primarily found at night or in deep or shadowed waters. They live for exactly 9 years, and when they die, they dissolve into water from which several new Ezrai form, identical to their mother. I imagine that this is only the case when they reach the end of their lifespan naturally, not when they're slain. Ezrai live off algae and other water plants. Their refusal to eat meat is part of a larger pact with the creatures of the water. They eat none of them, and in return, no predator attacks them in any circumstance. However, they are considered a delicacy by hydroloths, slod, and marinoloths, and captured Ezrai sealed in magic amphoras go for a high price throughout the lower plains. Ancient tales say that the Ezrai used to act as the upper plains counterpart to marinoloths, serving as guides on the river Oceanus, but they've long since stopped, perhaps due to being hunted for how delicious they apparently are. The Bacchae, as I've mentioned once or twice already, are deranged and destructive creatures filled with an insatiable urge for Dionysian revelry. They look like dirty, half-mad humans dressed in loose, torn robes and laurel crowns. The Bacchae are most common in the realm of Olympus, but they can be found anywhere in the first layer of Arborea, also called Olympus, by the way. They travel in packs, moving at magical speed across the plain in a chaotic whirlwind of hedonistic pleasures and kicking, scratching, biting destruction. They consume or destroy everything in their path, and if you get into a fight with them, their whirlwind of flailing fists and eye-gouging nails are likely to tear apart your armor and ruin it completely. Though they aren't always a chaotic mess of euphoria and rage. When the roaming horde of Bacchae come across a person, they stop for a moment to demand alcohol and other drugs. If they're denied, or if they just don't like what they're offered, they burst into a violent attack. They're extremely tribalistic creatures. Either you're one of the Bacchae, or you're an enemy. That being said, they do invite strangers to join them in their never-ending orgiastic revelry. They wait until the next morning to pass judgment on the newcomer, deciding whether to accept them or not. If they don't, it'll be a violent expulsion. If they do, it'll be quite difficult to ever leave. Most of the Bacchae are petitioners that have been infected with this spirit of revelry against their will, a transformation often triggered by the magic of music and dance. But planers and primes can transform into Bacchae as well. They just have to willingly join them. Then, for every day spent with the Bacchae, they have to make a saving throw to avoid becoming one permanently. The sensates, as well as some other sylvan creatures such as satyrs, centaurs, dryads, and oreads, are capable of joining and leaving the Bacchae at will when they feel like indulging themselves in a wild night of debauchery. The children of the vine consider it a divine blessing to be accepted by them, but the Bacchae don't accept very many of them for whatever reason. Maybe they just think it's funny to deny their most ardent fans. In 3rd edition, the Bacchae are a bit different. They're satyr-like, caught in mid-transformation between man and beast. And they're also non-violent, most likely to flee if attacked. The only real danger they pose is enticing people to join their never-ending celebrations. Dryads are wood nymphs, elusive nature spirits who protect the forests of Arborea. And there's a lot of forest in Arborea. Dryads can be found in many places throughout the multiverse, of course, but they're especially prominent here. They're often depicted as attractive females made of soft wood, though their appearance changes from edition to edition. Each dryad is bound to a single tree, and if their tree dies, so do they. Thus they act as fierce guardians of the natural world, fighting on behalf of the forests. Just like the other nature spirits of the plane, they require sacrifices from those traveling through their woods. Small shrines are scattered all throughout Arborea in springs, caves, and groves, alerting travelers to the fact that spirits live nearby that expect an offering. To ignore these shrines is to invite bad luck and the wrath of the local spirits. And a common way that dryads deal with such interlopers is to charm them into a magical enslavement. Oreads are similar to dryads, except they're mountain spirits, bound to a single mountain peak. But unlike dryads, they don't die if their mountain does, as mountains don't really die. Though I guess over hundreds of millions of years, a mountain would erode completely, and by then the mountain would probably no longer have any Oreads. They do, however, feel the pain of any degradation to their mountain and its environment, such as mining or deforestation of the mountain trees. So they exact a harsh vengeance on miners, woodcutters, and the like. Similarly to dryads, they like to magically enslave these intruders by singing what's called a Song of Stone, whose effects last a full year. Oreads look like stony women with skin that resembles the rock of the mountain they protect, and hair that looks like lichen. They eat minerals, such as quartz, which is a good way to appease them. The very oldest Oreads are known as Snowhair Oreads, and they are far more powerful and have broken free of their bond to a single mountain peak, instead becoming protectors of entire mountain ranges. But the creatures that define Arborea the most are the Eladrin, the native race of Arborea. The Eladrin are beings that truly embody chaotic good. And by the way, I've always used the word Eladrin as both a singular and a plural term, but I'm learning now that apparently the plural is actually Eladrins, at least until 4th edition. And honestly, after reading all this material, I can't decide which version sounds better to me, but I think I'm going to use it without the S. Sorry if that bothers you. Anyway, Eladrin are elf-like fairy people of surpassing grace and beauty. They are a wild and free people, living lives of song and celebration, always moving from place to bask in nature's beauty and seek adventure. They aid good people and fight against evil, especially in the form of tyranny, but prefer to do so on their own terms, with individual acts of kindness and heroism. Eladrin are celestials, beings of the same general category as Archons, Asimon, Cardinals, and Asuras, and as such they hate fiends, especially the Beatezu and Tenari, and the stronger Eladrin roam the plains to hunt them down. Eladrin have changed a lot over the editions. Well, mostly from 3rd edition to 4th edition, when they introduced the Feywild and turned the Eladrin into high elves native to that plane, the progenitor race of the normal elves. Though in fairness, there is one 2nd edition source that says Eladrin are distantly related to the elves. Honestly, the Feywild kind of stole a good chunk of Arborea's identity. I suppose it wasn't as big of a problem in 4th edition, because Arborea doesn't exist there, though Arvandor does, the astral dominion of the elves and Eladrin. But in 5th edition, Arborea makes a comeback, except without Eladrin, because they've become a Feywild thing, which really ruins the symmetry of which planes have their own unique planar races. And it is true that the plane of fairy was a thing in 3rd edition, which is basically the same as the Feywild, except 3rd edition didn't place the Eladrin there, so it wasn't stepping on Arborea's toes so much. There are 2 main types of Eladrin, lesser and greater. And what's somewhat unusual about Eladrin, at least compared to the planar races I've covered so far, is that there is no movement up this hierarchy. Many of the other native planar races, like the Beatezu, the Tenari, the Yugoloths, the Archons, and the Modrons, all have some method of promotion up the ranks, transforming into a different, more powerful form each time. But for the Eladrin, it would seem no such system exists. And where some of those races, such as the Fiends, often begin as petitioners, Eladrin don't. You're just born a certain type of Eladrin, and that's how you stay until you die. Magical creatures are often immune to non-magical or non-silver weapons, but as Fey creatures, Eladrin can be damaged by weapons of cold-wrought iron, with lesser Eladrin taking double damage from such weapons. Lesser Eladrin are also a bit restricted when it comes to where they can go, only being able to travel between the upper planes, the Outlands, and the astral plane. Greater Eladrin have no such restriction, being able to freely enter any plane. However, they are bound by magical laws that require them to veil themselves when traveling in the prime material, appearing instead as a creature native to the world they're visiting. They are unable to reveal their true nature except in the direst of circumstances, and if they do, they have to return to Arborea for 1001 years before they're able to return to the prime material plane. Not counting these veils, each type of Eladrin has 2 forms. They are humanoid, elf-like form, and an energy form, though each of these 2 forms has a distinct look for each type of Eladrin. There are 4 types of lesser Eladrin: Kur, Novier, Brelani, and Shier. Or perhaps you'd like to pronounce those Kure, Noviere, and Shire. I'm not really sure. The Kurs are the weakest Eladrin. They are 2-foot-tall, sprite-like creatures who look like tiny, slender elves with gossamer wings. They're typically extremely colorful and like to dress in garish clothing. They're mostly nocturnal and are the commoners of Eladrin society. They act as messengers, scouts, and pranksters who bring joy, humor, and lightheartedness wherever they go, making even the most dour Doomguard crack a smile. Despite their penchant for levity and whimsicality, they're quite capable of turning their mischief-making ways serious and deadly when confronted with evil creatures. That being said, they're more likely to run away from a confrontation with all but their most hated rivals, those being the Imps of Beator and the Quasits of the Abyss. And they don't like Mephits much either. Though seeing as they can't enter the lower planes, at least willingly, they're unlikely to encounter Imps and Quasits very often. Kurs can take on the form of a tiny, incorporeal ball of fairy light, though either tiny is a bad description, or this is a misprint. A ball with a 6-foot diameter is far from being tiny, and it's a bit weird to me that these little sprites would turn into balls of light 3 times their size. I think it would make more sense if their ball of light form is even smaller than their humanoid form. Anyway, while in this form, they can fly at twice their normal speed and can pass through solid objects. Kurs form groups called fairy circles, and are far less nomadic than the larger Eladrin, often finding a nice grove and staying there for centuries before moving to a new spot. Kurs often just stick with their own kind in their fairy circles, but there are many of them who attend the courts of the greater Eladrin, serving as messengers, heralds, and pages. Noviers, or Noviers, are the Eladrin of the sea, and they're primarily found in Ossa, the second layer of Arborea. However, in what's evidently a contradiction to what this very same book said a few pages before, Noviers sometimes visit the oceans on prime material worlds, despite the fact that they're lesser Eladrin. Noviers look like aquatic elves or nixies, with greenish, bluish, or even golden skin and hair, though they look more human than aquatic elves do, as they don't have gills or webbed fingers. They can take on the form of golden dolphins made entirely of water. Noviers are the most approachable and straightforward Eladrin, unlike, for example, the Kurs, which hardly ever take anything seriously. But a bit like them, they are one of the less nomadic Eladrin, finding a favorite island or coastline and staying there for years, though not the centuries that Kurs spend on a single place. However, Noviers are more reclusive and stick to their own more than the Kurs do, and almost never can be found among the courts of the greater Eladrin. Where Noviers are the predominant Eladrin of Ossa, Brelani are the Eladrin of the snowy, sandy wastes of Pelion, the third layer. They can occasionally be found in the deserts or arctic wastes of other planes, as they love nothing better than the freedom and beauty of open land. They look like short, stocky elves, though still very graceful, with bright, silvery white hair and eyes that change hue to fit the Brelani's mood. They can also take the form of a whirlwind of dust, sand, or snow, which allows them to move with incredible speed. Brelani are the wildest of the Eladrin, with no other kind capable of matching the heights of their fury, sorrow, or joy. Their fickle temperaments make them dangerous to approach, as you never know if a Brelani is going to greet you with overflowing enthusiasm or a feral rage. They travel hundreds of miles a day through Pelion in loose bands, stopping to play pranks on travelers or fight unwelcome evil forces. Shiers are the strongest of the lesser Eladrin. They are the knights and warriors of Arborea, defenders of the Eladrin courts, riding across the plain each night, seeking out evil intruders to drive them away. They look like 7-foot-tall elves with long limbs and narrow faces, possessing exceptional strength despite their slender appearance, which is really something that's true of most Eladrin. They can turn into a small ball of fairy light, similar to the Cours, except the Shiers don't do this very often, pretty much only when they're badly wounded and need to escape or need to become very small. They are the most numerous type of Eladrin in the courts, and are extremely honorable and courageous, though they often have an icy demeanor when meeting strangers, unless those strangers measure up to the Shiers' high standards of chivalry. The gaze of the Shier causes fear in any evil creature that meets its eyes. There are also 4 types of greater Eladrin: Fear, Gale, Shirati, and Tulani. Fears are the Eladrin most devoted to art, music, and magic. Their lives are consumed by passion and the pursuit of beauty. They're the wandering minstrels and bards of Eladrin society, and it's said that nothing can match the eldritch beauty of a Fear's song. They can be found attending Eladrin courts, as well as traveling across the plane to entertain Cours and other creatures. They typically travel alone, and any given court usually only contains 1 or 2 of them. Their search for beauty takes them all over, so you can also find them in the other upper planes, the Outlands, or even the prime material plane, as they have a deep love for the art of mortals. This makes them rather approachable for Eladrin, as they're accustomed to interacting with mortals and often seek out mortals of exceptional skill or beauty. Similarly to the Brillani, Fears resemble stocky elves, except they're taller than Brillani and are distinguished by their brilliant red hair and fiery red eyes that have no iris or pupil and can blind people with their gaze. Fears can take on a fire form that allows them to fly, which can take the shape of a man-sized pillar or ball of flame. Gales are the knights errant of Eladrin society. That might sound similar to the role of the Shiers, but the difference is that the Shiers are the protectors of Arborea, fending off evil that enters the plane, whereas the Gales seek out evil elsewhere. Since their endeavors take them to far-off planes, most often the prime material, they're the Eladrin most accustomed to being veiled. Because of this, they often work behind the scenes, offering guidance and encouraging others to act against evil. I think of them in essentially the same role as Gandalf, willing and able to go off on adventures of their own and fight evil personally, but also traveling across the land rousing others to do the same, all while keeping their true identity hidden. They also serve as advisors and counselors on the Eladrin courts, though typically no more than 1 per court. Gales are the most serious and heavy-hearted Eladrin, as their constant fight against evil is always weighing on their minds. When not disguised in their veils, the Gales look like tall, athletic high elves, constantly surrounded by a nimbus of light that functions as a double-strength protection from evil spell in a 20-foot radius. Any evil creature who looks into their opalescent eyes is immediately slain if they fail a saving throw, while stronger creatures are stricken by fear. Gales can also take on the form of a 5-foot diameter globe of eldritch colors that fire beams of light at enemies. Shiratis are an addition from 3rd edition, and they aren't explicitly referred to as Greater Eladrin. I just assume that they're greater because they have a higher CR than Fears and Gales. They fulfill a similar role as the Shiers and Gales, but where the Shiers are more defensive and the Gales often play a supportive role, the Shiratis are more openly offensive. They travel across the plains, helping the oppressed and battling for freedom. They may be the most morally flexible of all Celestials, believing that everyone should be free to act however they want, as long as they aren't impinging on the freedoms of others. While other Eladrin look thin and slender, belying their true strength, the Shiratis have quite the intimidating stature. They look like statuesque, 11-foot-tall, heavily muscled elves with bronze skin, piercing black eyes, and large wings, often carrying spiked chains as their weapon of choice. They can take the form of a swirling cloud of golden, triangular shards of light. The greatest type of Eladrin are the Tulani, the fairy lords of the Eladrin courts that I've been mentioning. Each Tulani has its own court, except in the cases where a Tulani couple co-rules a court. The courts are comprised of the ruling Tulani, 1 or occasionally more Gales and Fears, many Shiers, and an uncounted number of Cours. The Tulani are compassionate but distant lords, allowing their subjects to do as they please. The Eladrin courts are scattered all throughout the first layer of Arborea. They aren't places as much as they are groups, as each court never stays in the same spot for more than one night. So they can be quite hard to find. If anything, you're more likely to stumble into one unintentionally. Though, if you do, the Tulani are gracious hosts, as long as you behave yourself. Tulani look like tall elf lords in shimmering robes of shifting colors. They're beings of unearthly beauty and grace, with voices of living music and faces that shine so brightly that mortals find it difficult to look at them. They also exude a magical aura similar to that of the Gales, but even stronger. The Tulani are very peaceful, only becoming violent in the direst of emergencies, or when Arborea itself is threatened. But they're extremely powerful when provoked. If you want a comparison, they're more powerful than Pit Lords and Balors. Their gaze instantly kills all but the strongest evil creatures who fail a saving throw, and they can take on a superior version of any of the energy forms of the other Eladrin. At the very apex of Eladrin society is the Lady of Stars, Queen Morwell, ruler of the Court of Stars, which I'll talk about later when I get to the locations of Arborea. Much like the other Eladrin, Morwell resembles an elf, though only slightly, as her otherworldly beauty makes her difficult to define. She wears a shimmering mantle of stars that flicker out before they touch the ground. Morwell is also known as the Lady of the Lake, the Queen of Stars, or the Fairy Queen, not to be confused though with Titania of the Seelie Court, who is also called the Fairy Queen. Morwell is the greatest of the Tulani, but she's so powerful that she's considered to be a demigoddess, although I suppose technically she's a celestial paragon, equal in power level to the Archfiends. But you can be both an Archfiend and a god, like Asmodeus, so I don't see why she couldn't also be a goddess. Morwell has always been the ruler of the Eladrin, as far as any of them can remember, although ruler isn't really the right term, since the chaotic nature of the Eladrin means they deeply cherish freedom and independence. So she rules the Eladrin in the same sort of way that the Tulani rule their own courts. Ultimately, the Tulani answer to her, but they're free to do as they wish. If anything, rather than her giving them orders, I'd imagine they beseech her when they need counsel. Morwell rules the Court of Stars with the help of her two consorts, a male Tulani and master politician named Faerun, and a female Burlani and fierce warrior named Gwynharwith. Any planar adventurer knows that magic works differently in the Outer Planes. It works differently compared to the Prime Material or to the Inner Planes, and it works differently compared from one Outer Plane to another. Survival in the Outer Planes relies heavily on two things: knowing when to run away, and knowing what you're getting yourself into in the first place. And that means learning the rules of magic of the plane you're about to visit before you get there. Because you're in for some real trouble when the spell you're casting to save your life doesn't work because you didn't know that healing necromancy spells don't function in the Grey Waste, for example. Not all schools of magic are affected in every plane. In Arborea, only conjuration, divination, enchantment, necromancy, and elemental spells are affected. Because the spirits of nature hold sway here, all attempts at monster summoning spells will summon them instead. Any explicit attempt to summon fiends or other creatures from the lower planes will backfire immensely. It'll work, but only technically, as the wrath of the Furies will come down upon you, and the Furies live in the Grey Waste of Hades, which is one of the lower planes. The peoples of Arborea are steeped in mysticism and ritual. As such, divination is well regarded in this plane, but divination spells require more material components than normal, such as the entrails of an animal. Mechanically, the added hassle of properly using divination means these spells take longer to cast, adding 1 round to their casting time per level of the spell, making them unfeasible to use during combat or if you're in a hurry. Because Arborea is a land of deep emotions, enchantment spells related to emotions are much more effective here, making the saving throws more difficult for the target and the effects lasting twice as long. However, like conjuration, enchantment spells can backfire. There's a 20% chance that the target of your manipulations will go berserk and begin relentlessly attacking you with increased strength. Enchantments that don't have an emotional component, such as sleep, work normally. It's hard being a necromancer in the Outer Planes, So many planes put restrictions on that school of magic. Arborea is yet another plane that has little patience for tampering with natural processes. In most of the plane, only healing necromancy spells function, but there are some exceptions. In the realm of Olympus, necromancy is the jurisdiction of Hecate, even though she doesn't reside there, and she only approves the use of necromancy for evil purposes. Considering that this is a good realm, this essentially means that nearly no one is allowed to use it. In the realm of Arvandor, necromancy is almost entirely forbidden, except at the whim of the gods Libellus and Corellon, who allow it to be used sporadically, mostly depending on how devoted the spellcaster is. Lastly, there's elemental magic. Strange as it may seem, given the fact that Arborea is a wonderland of nature in epic proportion, the elements are largely inaccessible from Arborea. Air magic is only accessible in Arvandor, water magic is only accessible in the second layer Ossa, and fire and earth magic just aren't usable. That is, unless you know the spell key. Spell keys are how you get around all the restrictions the outer planes place on magic, though they're often nearly as cumbersome as the restrictions themselves, and sometimes are so involved that you're better off just not even trying to cast the spell in the first place. Spell keys can be anything, really. Objects, ideas, actions. Sometimes they're objects that must merely be in your possession, other times they're objects that you expend when you cast the spell. It all depends on what plane you're in and what school of magic you're using, and sometimes even the specific spell you're casting. In Arborea, there are keys for each affected school, with different keys for low, mid, and high-level spells, and sometimes unique keys for specific spells. The spell keys are generally ritual offerings to the nature spirits that allow the spells to function normally. Low-level conjuration spells require food for the summoned creature. Mid-level spells need a carved image of the creature, and high-level spells require that you speak the language of the summoned creature. If you're summoning something that isn't a creature, no spell key is required. Low-level divination spells require an offering of some inanimate object, such as gold or wine or gems. Mid-level spells require an animate offering, but that doesn't necessarily mean killing the animal. For instance, you could free some doves, and that would count. High-level spells require giving up an item of particular value to the spellcaster, such as a keepsake or magic item. Low-level enchantment spells require that you capture the target's attention verbally before casting the spell, such as by telling a joke or posing a riddle. Mid-level spells require that you know the name of the target. High-level spells require that you give the target something they desire first. Low-level necromancy spells need a few dark gems. Mid-level spells require a cup full of some life-giving liquid such as sap or blood. High-level spells require pure life energy, which I take to mean your own, but DM's choice, I guess. All elemental spells, no matter the level, require an offering of the opposite element as the spell you're casting, but the size of the offering must correspond to the power of the spell. So, a bucket of water to cast Burning Hands, and something like lighting a small grove on fire to cast Control Water. But good luck getting away with that in Arborea. As you can see, it's not always worth it to jump through the necessary hoop to cast the spell you want to cast, and to a lot of players, that type of thing isn't fun. So I like to talk about spell keys and the effects each plane places on magic, because even though I'm sure most people won't use these rules, I think it provides further character for the plane. It can be quite difficult to get to any given outer plane, though of course it depends on where you're starting and who you are. Starting in the prime material plane makes it much harder than starting in a different outer plane, and harder still if you're some low-level schmuck without access to planar magic. But even if that's you, it's not impossible. Many paths lead to Arborea, as it's connected to two of the most prominent interplanar pathways, Mount Olympus and Yggdrasil, even though there aren't any Norse gods here. This means that as long as you're on a planet that acknowledges the Greek or Norse gods, there's a conduit somewhere. Probably a few. But there are other conduits aside from the ones that are part of Mount Olympus or Yggdrasil, like those that connect to Arvandor. Of course, conduits can be hard to access, and most people probably don't know exactly where they are, if they know of them at all, so you're better off if you can get a hold of some sort of planar magic. Maybe do a favor for a high-level wizard and have them cast Gate, or Plane Shift, or Astral Projection. And by the way, the color pools in the astral plane that lead to Arborea are sapphire. But if you're already in the Outer Planes, you've got more options. Sigil, the City of Doors, is absolutely full of portals. There are many that randomly appear and disappear, and there are many shifting portals whose secrets are well guarded or unknown. But there are a few stable, known portals, such as the one controlled by the Sensates in the Civic Fest Hall, the one on the street of Portal Close in the Ladies' Ward, the one in the Ditch, or the one in the Armory. Don't ask me why there's one in the Armory when that's the Doomguard's headquarters in Sigil, and they have nothing to do with Arborea. That's just what this portal map shows. I would think that might be a mistake. The shifting portals of Sigil that lead to Arborea have been known to appear in taverns and butcher shops. Also, Mount Celestia, Elysium, the Beastlands, and sometimes even Isgard connect to Arborea through the river Oceanus. So if you're already in the upper planes and fancy a boat ride, that's a fine way to get to Arborea. And of course, most portals that lead to any given plane come from the two neighboring planes, which in this case would be the Beastlands and Isgard. These portals look like spinning crimson discs, and you cannot see where they lead unless you use a divination spell such as Warp Sense. However, permanent portals within a few thousand leagues of the two mega-realms in Arborea, Olympus and Arvandor, are under watch and controlled by the pantheons of those realms, in many cases being surrounded by stone walls and iron gates to slow down intruders. Even still, because Arborea is connected to all of the Great Paths except for the River Styx, it's one of the more accessible planes. But most people end up in Arborea using an altogether different route, and that is, of course, dying. Arborea is certainly one of the better realms, so it would make sense to me if people lived their lives in the conscious hope of getting Arborea as their afterlife. And this is something that would be much easier to do if you just worship the Greek or Elven pantheons and abide by their tenets. By the way, pantheons in D&D that also exist in real-world mythology typically have worshippers in many prime worlds, not just Earth. But anyway, I'd still wager a large number of people also go to Arborea unintentionally. After all, if you consider all of the uncountable number of people that exist in the prime material plane, I doubt most of them even know about the outer planes at all. So if they're not already tied up with some patron deity of another plane, then what afterlife they receive depends on their behavior in life, on their alignment. If you were chaotic good in life, but skewed a bit more toward goodness, you'd go to the Beastlands. If you skewed instead a bit toward the chaotic side of things, you'd go to Isgard. If you were a little chaotic good, but mostly neutral, you'd go to the Outlands. But if you were chaotic good through and through, then you'd go to Arborea, the land of unrelenting pleasure and untamable passion. Sounds like a good time, if you ask me. But if you'd prefer to visit Arborea before your death, there is another pretty popular way to get there, and that's through Arborea's Gate Town. The Outlands contain a gate town corresponding to every outer plane, except itself, for obvious reasons. These gate towns are so named because they are each home to a permanent portal leading to their respective plane, since they, for the most part, serve as an accessible entry point to another plane, and thus attract a congregation of people to these portals that have an affinity for the alignment and culture of that particular plane. Gate towns take on a similar character to the plane they lead to. They're like that plane in miniature, a sample before committing to the full thing. Gameplay-wise, perhaps a way for lower-level players to experience some of what the plane has to offer without all the risks and dangers of the actual plane. Though that's not to say the Outlands is a safe place. And you could very well say that the reason the gate towns reflect the planes they lead to goes the other way. It's not that the people come there because they already behave similarly to the inhabitants of the plane. It's that the influence of the plane seeps out of the gate into the surrounding area, changing the people. Well, it's both, really. But in Planescape, there's a phenomenon known as cosmic realignment. If the beliefs and behaviors of a place has a mismatch with the alignment of the plane it's in strongly enough and for long enough, then the place literally moves to whatever plane matches. So for every gate town, there's always a question. If this place is so similar to a different plane, what's keeping it here? Historically, that answer is often nothing. Many a gate town has cosmically realigned. Sometimes that's what the citizens want, and other times it's not, but it happens anyway. But whenever it does happen, the gate stays behind in the Outlands, and a new gate town forms around it. I'm not sure exactly how this works, and there's 3 main options as far as I can tell. Maybe the chunk of land the town occupied is ripped away from the surface of the Outlands, and the portal stays in the same exact location, and land just reappears around it, whether immediately or slowly over time. Maybe the land gets ripped away, and the portal moves to a nearby location where there is land, which would mean that there's just a gaping hole in every place that has ever cosmically realigned. Or maybe the land itself remains intact, and all of the features, buildings, and people on it get wiped away, transported to the other plane. There are some cases where I think the third option makes the most sense, but the Planescape books refer to literal chunks of land being removed, so it's gotta be the first or second options. The only conundrum is what happens with the gate. It's clearly meant to stay in the same spot, but that would mean that after a realignment, there's now a gate just stranded in the midst of a giant hole in the earth. That doesn't seem right. But I guess most things about Planescape are intentionally nonsensical, and the answer, both in-game and out-of-game, is nobody knows how it works. It just does. Don't overthink it. Anyway, Arborea's gate town is called Sylvania. Much like Arborea, it's a non-stop party, always filled with activity and music and drunken debauchery. It's an ever-changing celebration, where the locals tend to treat visitors as if the celebration is all for them. In Sylvania, the senses swirl and blend, creating a synesthetic effect, where you can taste sounds, see smells, hear colors, and so on in a dizzying mix of sensual delights. And if that's not disorienting enough, it's pretty easy to get lost here too, even though the town's not that big. Sylvania is roughly shaped like a circle, but there are winding paths that meet in strange ways, making it somewhat of a crisscrossing maze of roads. The buildings are a random assortment of styles and materials, many of them not shaped like buildings at all, but like animals or faces. And some of them even move. All of this gives the impression that the town was built by drunk people, and it probably was. Sylvania is surrounded by dense woods, and the town itself is also quite overgrown, with giant plants and trees that swallow up entire blocks. These parts of town are where the Sylvan races, such as the elves, prefer to live. Speaking of which, the town's populace is mostly an even split of humans, elves, and Barriar, each group set in a constant competition of whose unhinged revelry can outdo the others. Though for all of Sylvania's constant commotion, it's actually got a rather small population. Of course, as I've talked about in the past, D&D consistently underpopulates its towns and cities, especially considering that magic is a thing and could easily solve most, if not all, of the problems that would limit the population of a technologically medieval environment. And it's even worse for the Outer Planes, considering that this is literally the destination of all souls in the multiverse. So when this book says the population of Sylvania is 1,000 people, I don't buy it. But still, what we can take from this is that the population of Sylvania is small compared to other gate towns. Even a chaotic gate town still has rulership, and Sylvania is ruled by a group of eternal beings known as the Seven Spiriters. They're not quite undead, not quite petitioners, and not quite gods, rather something in between all of those. Perhaps just manifestations of Sylvania's character. Being spirits, they don't have bodies of their own. Instead, they possess people and use their bodies for a few decades at a time. Most of the people that get possessed by them are volunteers, but not all. Be careful of causing trouble in Sylvania, or you might become the next host for one of the Seven Spiriters. Each of the Spiriters goes by a title that describes their nature. There's thought, knowledge, action, passion, reflection, pain, and rest. In many gate towns, there would be a building where the rulers reside, but in Sylvania, they have no permanent spot, and instead wander throughout the town. 5th edition D&D doesn't really provide details on most of the Outer Planes, but it does for the Outlands, because the 5th edition Planescape campaign, Turn of Fortune's Wheel, is based primarily in that plane, which means that there are 5th edition versions of all the gate towns, all of which are at least slightly different from 2nd edition. Here, the citizens of Sylvania are primarily Fae and humanoids, which is a lot more general than the humans, elves, and Barriar of 2nd edition. This still includes humans and elves, but also a variety of other creatures, like harpies and satyrs and pixies and hobgoblins, because goblinoids are fae now for some reason. The town is also more fully intertwined with the forest around it, rather than just some parts being overgrown. The Seven Spiriters are similar, but are now eidolons, meaning they often possess inanimate objects such as statues and topiary hedges. Unfortunately, in 5th edition, they no longer possess unwilling hosts. Though to make up for that, there are sinister forces at work in Sylvania. It's a town full of fae, but that doesn't just mean the good fae. The forests a bit farther out from town are shrouded in darkness, mystery, and violence. Hags, redcaps, and other evil creatures lure unwitting partygoers off into creepy cottages in the woods, whence they never return. But the dark side of Sylvania isn't due only to the evil fae. It's also just a feature of the town, as some revelers become so lost in the celebrations that they get stuck in an unshakable trance of numb ecstasy, unable to ever leave. One thing I really like about 5th edition's version of Sylvania is that while 2nd edition's doesn't really provide an answer to the question of why Sylvania stays in the Outlands, 5th edition's does. Because while Sylvania does have a very similar character to Arborea, it seems the thing that distinguishes it, that keeps it from cosmic realignment, is the presence of evil creatures, like the hags, redcaps, and also vampires. Though it should be noted that in the Outer Planes, just because a creature is evil doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act evil at all times. And also, just because a creature is typically evil doesn't necessarily mean that every individual is. So you can certainly meet vampires in Sylvania who just want to party, and maybe just do a little bit of blood-sucking, if you're into it. As you'd probably expect, Sylvania has a lot of taverns, though the most popular one is the Dipping Dragon. It's a building in the shape of a dragon, and the building moves, tilting back and forth, so that the head of the dragon can drink from a pool of water outside. Honestly, it sounds like it would make the people inside nauseous, but I guess the fun of everyone rolling across the floor and vomiting all over each other when the building tilts 45 degrees is worth it. Though the most prominent spot in town is the Sensate Embassy, the Society of Sensations outpost in the Outlands. It might actually be the most bureaucratic place in Sylvania, though that's not to say it's boring or doesn't fit in, it's just where a lot of recruitment probably takes place. Many visit the embassy just to marvel at the architecture. It's a large pyramid made of petrified wood, and all of the rooms inside are hanging from the sloped ceiling. The spacious open area underneath these suspended rooms is used for combat and partying. Nearby the embassy, there are 2 large temples, one devoted to the Greek pantheon and one devoted to the Elven pantheon. The Greek temple is an acropolis on a low plateau with columns in the shape of female warriors who can come to life to protect the town. The Elven temple is within a huge banyan tree with buildings in the upper branches. Another thing I like about 5th edition's entry on Sylvania is that all of the locations it adds are new, rather than rehashing or slightly adjusting what's already been written. The hottest party spot in town is the Yearning Timbers. It's an event hall carved from an enormous banyan tree that was once an elven temple, which sounds like the very same elven temple I just mentioned. Perhaps this is what became of it in 5th edition. Or perhaps this was the original elven temple, then it got converted into a party hall while the temple was relocated to a different tree. Whichever way you like. Either way, the magic of the tree allows the 7 Spiriters to rearrange it to suit any theme, whether that be romantic balls, psychedelic raves, or anything in between. Not only is the theme ever-changing, but so are the special guests, who are often renowned or infamous figures from across the multiverse. Gods are often invited, but few attend. Underneath the Yearning Timbers, there's a nocturnal club called the After Party. This is where the undead hang out, like liches, vampire lords, and sometimes even Jurgle, a former god of death. Goodberry Grove is an idyllic thicket of shrubs and toadstools in the woods, and each morning the shrubs regenerate their berries. There's a pixie kingdom called Irindar nestled within Goodberry Grove, who crown their leader based on how hard they can party. These either have to be truly tiny pixies or a very large thicket in order to contain a kingdom of them, or perhaps just a very small kingdom, as pixies are normally like a foot tall, so how many of them can you really fit into a grove, especially when the kingdom doesn't even take up the entire grove? So I'm just going to go ahead and say that they're tiny even for pixies. But what I don't have to make up is that when you enter the kingdom of Arvandor, you get shrunk down to their size, which is pretty fun. Deeper into Sylvania's woods, there's a place known as Widow's Henge. It's a set of 8 ancient standing stones, which by the way are known as menhirs, in a silent clearing. The stones have inscriptions that are so ancient that nobody can read them anymore. These stones are largely a mystery, with some believing that they used to be a prison for the 7 spiriters, and others believing it's a druidic ritual site to some unknown god of nature. But somewhat recently, one of the stones fell over, and ever since there's always been a fresh, mouth-watering feast atop it. It's said that whoever partakes in the feast is never seen again. Sylvania's gate is somewhere in these woods as well, but its location is ever-changing. In 5th edition, it's essentially a normal shifting portal, sometimes opening in the hollow of a tree, sometimes in a circle of stones, and so on. The 7 spiriters are the only ones who always know where it is. In 2nd edition, the portal is invisible, but there is a trick for finding it. First, you've got to get yourself lost in the woods, which is easier if you're drunk or otherwise intoxicated. And then you've got to try finding your way out. You'll end up walking through the portal and into Arborea, though the destination of the gate is always shifting as well. It'll always be somewhere in Arborea, and I would assume somewhere in the first layer, but you never know exactly where it'll take you. The first layer of Arborea is Olympus. It's also called the topmost layer, as layers are often, but not always, conceptualized as being stacked on top of each other, with the first layer, the most accessible one, being on top, and the deeper layers being less and less accessible. This is the layer that most often exemplifies the plane, and this is what most people will think of when they hear Arborea. That's often true of the outer planes, that the first layer is the most well-known and therefore the one that most represents the plane as a whole, but in Arborea, it's extra true. And that's because in this plane, the portals to the deeper layers are even rarer than usual. It's kinda hard to go to Ossa or Pelion, and so most people that visit Arborea only ever see Olympus. Olympus is a layer of extremes. The hills are as big as mountains, and the actual mountains make regular mountains look like hills. It's a place of steep cliffs, dramatic valleys and canyons, peaceful fields, vineyards and orchards, untamed and savage wilderness replete with deadly legendary beasts, and endless enchanted forests of monstrously large trees. This book says that the trees rival the size of redwoods in real life. But that seems too small to me for Arborea. That's not larger than life. That's as large as life. So I think these trees should be at least double that size. Olympus is both the name of a layer and a realm within that layer. And in 1st edition, it was also the name of the entire plane. This is because the realm of Olympus is the most well-known place in the entire plane, and it's one of the biggest realms there is in the outer planes. Even after 1st edition, many primes call the whole plane Olympus, although there's a reason they call the primes the Clueless. Though the elves would take issue with this being called Olympus. To an elf, the whole first layer is called Arvandor, because to them, the elven realm of Arvandor is the most important place here, and it's also one of the biggest realms there is. So it isn't just elves that think Arvandor is important. These 2 realms make up most of what the plane is known for, and since they're the realms of entire pantheons, they're more like mega realms, containing sub-realms inside them for each deity that resides within. Though while they're both huge, they're not really anywhere near each other. They're separated by hundreds of miles of wilderness, which might not seem like a lot in an infinite plane, but they're supposed to be far apart. And despite the fact that they both occupy the highest pinnacles of the land, you can't see one from the other, because the plane itself is slightly convex. Nearly all of the described locations in the first layers are realms or within realms. In fact, there's only 2 locations that aren't. And by the way, realms are regions under the control of at least one god. They often have different characteristics than the surrounding layer, more befitting the god or gods that make the realm their home. You could think of them as a little bubble within a layer, though the boundaries of realms are just boundaries in the normal sense. You can just walk right in. The first described location that's not in a realm is the Gilded Hall, the headquarters of the Society of Sensation, located in a valley about halfway between Olympus and Arvandor. The Gilded Hall is everything a person might expect out of the Society of Sensation given their reputation. It's an achingly beautiful palace of shimmering gold where the festivals never end. It has an overwhelming aura that stops viewers in their tracks, striking each eye differently, as if it were magically tailored to appeal to each individual. Its beauty is so sharp and so piercing that just the sight of it kills lesser fiends. The splendor of this place enrages the fiends so much that it's a regular target of their raids. The cunning architecture of the Gilded Hall makes the entrances hard to discern at first, leading visitors on a path of discovery around the walls and through the perfect, always blooming gardens. The flowers are also quite overwhelming, and the smell makes newcomers sick after a couple days, though the sensates don't experience this problem. There's also an aura of magical restoration about the building, such that those who stay here that are gravely wounded experience miraculous cures. Naturally, as it's such a magnificent place, the two mega-realms it sits between try to claim credit for its creation. The Olympians say that Aphrodite herself crafted the Gilded Halls in all its graceful curves, while the elves, who call this place Perlamia and make regular pilgrimages here, claim that Hanali is responsible for the hall's enchanting beauty. The inside of the Gilded Hall is nearly as dazzling as the outside, filled with mirrors and sheets of luxurious gold. There's always activity here, whether it's dinner parties, masked balls, all-night drinking binges, extravagant orgies, picnics, you name it, with different wings of the hall waking or sleeping at all hours. And despite all this, some magic of the place prevents the buildup of dirt and trash. It also has a calming effect on the Bacchae, because this is just about the only place you'll ever find them acting civilized. Though there is a downside to the Gilded Hall, which is that it doesn't quite reflect the values of the sensates, seeing as it's really just a celebration of beauty and pleasure, when the sensates are supposed to stand for the deep experiencing of life across the entire spectrum, not just the positive side. Because of this, sensates have trouble ever leaving. The Gilded Hall effectively traps them here, at least a good amount of them, with some living their entire lives within the mirrored halls. It's said that the Gilded Hall is haunted by the spirits of those caught in its splendor. That might be one reason why Factol Erin Montgomery doesn't visit very often, aside from being the busiest and most powerful woman in Sigil, of course, not counting the Lady of Pain. The second location that's not a realm is the town of Thrasos, but it is just outside the realm of Olympus and is Greek in style, so it can feel like a part of that realm when it technically isn't. It's a small, coastal, Bronze Age town of narrow streets and houses that are stacked almost on top of each other. It's mostly inhabited by petitioners, known for its philosophers, artists, thespians, and also its olives and fine clothes and dyes. It's famous for its amphitheater carved into the hillside, just outside of town, whose acoustics are perfectly tuned so that even the farthest seats can hear whispers from the stage. That's a lot to be known for a small town. But there's more. Thrasos has a town square in a rotunda of white marble pillars, where townsfolk of all ages practice rhetoric and engage in lively debate in a democratic fashion. The gate to the Outlands is in this square, and it can only be opened by agreement of the town elders. I figure this must be a one-way gate, because if it was a two-way gate, that would contradict what I said about Sylvania's gate leading to unpredictable spots in Arborea. Though I suppose this could just be one of many possible entry points from the Outlands. However, this book does say the gate to the Outlands, which to me implies that there is only one, and possibly also implies that this is the destination of the Sylvania gate. So that's a bit strange, especially since there is another gate to the Outlands in Arvandor. Chalk that up to an error, I suppose. Anyway, Thrasos, at first glance, has a democratically elected government made up of the male petitioners in town. But in truth, the town is run by a one-person shadow government. A woman named Helena Toliopoulos controls the elections from behind the scenes, and she has for decades, as she has a stranglehold on the town's money supply. The townsfolk of Thrasos have been expecting the arrival of new land due to an anticipated cosmic realignment of some vineyards near Sylvania, but it's been years and it hasn't happened, though they still talk as if it'll happen any day. This has even led some sensates to stick around for weeks or even months, waiting for the celebration that never comes. But there is a third location. Rather than existing in any particular realm, instead it exists in several realms at once. Or perhaps more accurately, its location shifts between various places. It's known as Evergold, the Fountain of Youth, or the Fountain of Beauty. called Canathus by the Greeks. It rests in the center of Hanali's Crystal Palace in Arvandor, in Suni's quarter in Brightwater, in Aphrodite's palace in Olympus, and even in Freya's hall in Isgard, all goddesses of beauty, as well as other places throughout Arborea, such as in the Court of Stars of the Eladrin. It's a pool of shining golden water in a crystal basin, impossible to mistake for ordinary water. A single sip restores youth, and anyone who bathes in its magic waters sees their charisma increase and their looks improve. Scars vanish, hair shines, and every feature is enhanced to its best potential. The effects wear off after a year, though. Because of its ever-shifting location, Evergold is quite difficult to find, and only a few people know its pattern. Still, there's always plenty of sensates searching for it. In 3rd edition, it's described as crystal blue water that reflects light so cleanly that it hurts to gaze upon, and its effects only last a month and a day. As the first layer is the home of not one, but 2 pantheons, there are a whole lot of gods here. Because on top of the sizable Greek and Elven pantheons, there's also Tymora, Suni, Lyra, Morwell, Eolanis, Cyrenita, Chini, Laerm, Tritherion, Utu, Finder Wyvernspur, and sometimes even a 3rd pantheon, the Seelie Court. But because the big 2 are so huge and contain so many gods, I'm going to cover all of the other realms first and give the realms of Olympus and Arvandor their own sections. Brightwater is the realm of a handful of gods from the Faerunian pantheon, or the crystal sphere of the Forgotten Realms, called Realm Space. Crystal spheres, if you're not familiar, are all the bubble universes that make up the prime material plane. That, and the fact that there are tons of infinite planes, is why the whole scope of the world of D&D is called a multiverse. However, most crystal spheres are just solar systems, not full universes. The gods of Brightwater are Tymora, Suni, and Lyra. Tymora is the goddess of skill and good fortune. Suni is the goddess of beauty, love, and passion. And Lyra is the goddess of joy, dance, and freedom. But in 2nd edition, Lyra was also the goddess of trade and wealth, as she was covering the goddess Joaquin's portfolio for her while she was being held prisoner in mortal form in the Abyss. In the World Tree cosmology, where Brightwater is its own plane, Joaquin lives here as well, along with Sharess. But in the Great Wheel cosmology, Joaquin's realm is in the Outlands. For whatever reason, Sharess isn't mentioned in the Planescape books as far as I can tell. But in this book, she also resides in Brightwater. She's the goddess of hedonism, lust, and excess, among other things. Brightwater is a somewhat unique realm as far as Arborea is concerned, because Arborea is for the most part wilderness and nature. But Brightwater is an entirely urban realm, and the wildest and least predictable city in the whole plane. It's a freewheeling and exotic, sprawling town that prides itself on taking stupid chances and treating every day as if it's your last. But the stupid and reckless gambles often seem to work out. Brightwater is just lucky. The city is rich and gaudy, and the Greeks of the realm of Olympus consider it an eyesore. But luckily for them, it's pretty far away from Olympus. The Sensates, on the other hand, love this realm, and their gilded hall is quite close to the border. There's an aura of youth, excitement, and adventure about this place. It's rather new, too, apparently only 50 years old, though I'm not sure why that would be, as the main trinity of goddesses that rule the place are much older than that. While thievery is common enough in Brightwater, dishonesty is not tolerated. Here, if you break your word, you become cursed with terribly bad luck for a month. In game terms, that means a -4 penalty to all rolls. Perhaps the most important person in Brightwater is an enormously fat halfling priestess of Tymora named Winifred, or Winnie for short. She's extremely well connected across the plains, and hosts dinner parties full of intrigue attended by very powerful people and creatures such as Factols, high priests, and fiends. Brightwater is split into 3 quarters. There's the quarter of the Great Wheel, Tymora's quarter. It's the biggest and most popular, where people place bets on anything and everything. It's supposedly the greatest gathering place of adventurers and daredevils in all of the Outer Planes. They come to boast about the feats they'll accomplish, to be showered in rewards and glory if they return with proof of their deeds. The quarter of the Orange Lanterns, Lyra's quarter, is the most notorious. It's quietest during the day, with an atmosphere perfect for picnics, courtship, and lounging about. But at night, it becomes a loud carnival packed with musicians, dancers, and extravagance. This is where the successful adventurers go to spend their hard-won wealth. The Heartfire Quarter, Sunni's Quarter, is the smallest, and is one of the many homes of the Fountain of Evergold. This quarter is much more private than the others, where people go who seek passion, beauty, and love rather than a party. But it is kind of a dangerous quarter, not only because crimes of passion are common, but also because of the winding, maze-like streets near the center of the quarter from which people never return. After the pleasures of the other quarters have grown stale, adventurers seek the bliss and serenity hidden in the core of the Heartfire Quarter, as some paths result in a merging with the realm, but others result in utter destruction. In the World Tree cosmology, which is used by the Forgotten Realms campaign setting in 3rd edition, there are 2 more quarters. Sharess's quarter is called Rapture, and it's the darkest one, filled with twisting alleys and shady establishments. And Joaquin's quarter is the Marketplace Eternal, which is devoted to trade and is packed day and night. The Court of Stars is the realm or demiplane of Morwell, greatest of the Eladrin. She's often considered to be a goddess, or at least a demi-goddess, and I certainly consider her one. I described her earlier, but I didn't really describe her realm. The Court of Stars is a realm that resembles an enchanted autumnal forest under a starlit sky. It shifts between all 3 layers of Arborea, but I'm including it in this section because I can only imagine that most of the time it exists somewhere in the first layer. Though it is cool to imagine stumbling upon a twilit forest in a giant bubble at the bottom of the sea, or in a vast and otherwise empty desert. It drifts around the wild places like an autumn leaf in a pool, only existing where night falls over the plain. However, in the World Tree cosmology, Arborea doesn't exist, and the Court of Stars is instead in Seluna's plane, the Gates of the Moon. Despite being called the Court of Stars, it's not really the government of the Eladrin, but rather the heart of their people. Portals leading to the Court of Stars can manifest anywhere in Arborea, and the realm can only be accessed if Morwell wishes it so. Though I'd imagine that portals aren't the only way to enter the realm. Surely it's that if you happen upon the location, you can enter just the same as any other realm, but that the Court of Stars can only be found if Morwell wants you to find it. But despite all this, the place isn't that reclusive, as the Court of Stars receives frequent visitors, and Queen Morwell is a very welcoming host. Time doesn't pass here, so nothing here ages, and there is no hunger, thirst, or need for sleep. The Eladrin and Fae of the Court of Stars do still eat, drink, and sleep though, but only for enjoyment. Morwell's palace is a great crystal structure with spires rising high above the canopy. Morwell never leaves her realm, and it's said that if she ever did, the whole place would collapse and be destroyed forever. Ealanis is the giant goddess of love, mercy, and beauty. The giant gods originally lived in Arborea, along with the Greek Titans, but as I mentioned earlier, the elven gods came and pushed them out, to Isgard. The only god of the giants to remain was the gentle Ealanis, who kept out of the battle between the giants and elves, so they let her stay. Her realm, Floralium, is a place of quiet gardens and crystal springs. In the World Tree cosmology, it's instead a part of Jotunheim. Sirenita is the patron deity of Aarakocra. She's a goddess of protection and watchfulness. She's a member of the aquatic Asathalphanare pantheon, even though she's a sky goddess. This is because she has a good friendship with Deep Sashalas. This book says that she shares a realm with the elven goddess Erdrifania, an entirely aerial realm that consists of clouds and floating trees and islands. But this book gives her her own realm called Whistle Edge. Chi Ni is the Chinese goddess of weaving and love, and her realm is called the Loom of the Celestial River. It was harder to find well-sourced information for her compared to other real-world gods, but from what I can find, it seems she's the daughter of Shang-Ti, leader of the Chinese pantheon, also known as the Celestial Bureaucracy. She fell in love with a cowherd on the other side of the Celestial River, which is the Milky Way. But once her father learned of this, he was displeased and forbid her from ever seeing him. Her tears eventually softened his judgment, and thenceforth he allowed her to be with her lover on the 7th night of the 7th month of every year. Laerm is the goddess of fire, love, and art in the crystal sphere of the Birthright campaign setting, unofficially called Abrinus Space, which isn't a very good name, but it's because the world of Birthright is Abrinus. Anyway, Laerm provides musicians and artists with inspiration, and isn't widely worshipped, but is content with the fact that everyone in Abrinus worships her eventually in some way or another, whether they know it or not. Her realm is called Song's Height. Tritherion is the god of individuality and liberty in the Greyhawk campaign setting, or Grey Space. His realm is called the Forking Road, and it can be found on every road in the whole first layer, giving visitors a glimpse of the major paths in their lives. Utu is the Sumerian god of the sun. His realm is known as the Absorbing Light, and used to be in Mechanus because the influence of the god Enki was keeping it there despite the fact that Utu is chaotic good. But then Enki died, and Utu's realm cosmically realigned to Arborea. His realm is a mystery, as anyone who enters never leaves. It's said that anyone who steps foot in the realm merges with Utu, which is causing Utu to become more and more unstable as he grapples with an ever-worsening case of multiple personality disorder, which is actually now called dissociative identity disorder, but in this case I think the first term more clearly describes what Utu is going through. Merging with their god is the thing petitioners aspire to most, at least petitioners of realms. Petitioners without any particular realm seek to merge with the plane itself. So you might wonder why this is posing a problem for Utu. I've got two ideas. Merging with your patron deity is usually the reward and end result of perfectly living up to your god's ideals. So it takes a long time, and I think many, or maybe even most petitioners fail to achieve it. So it could be that gods aren't used to merges happening very often, and so the sheer number of merges is taking a toll on Utu. But more likely, the process of becoming worthy to merge makes a petitioner more and more like the god, so that by the time they merge, the essence of the petitioner essentially completely matches that of the god absorbing them. But in Utu's case, these merges happen immediately, no matter who you are or if you've done anything to become more like Utu. So each essence he absorbs is like a new, independent mind fighting for space inside him. Finder Wyvernspur is the god of the cycle of life in realm space. And yes, apparently it is pronounced Wyvernspur, even though I would usually say wyvern. He was originally a mortal, a bard and a founding member of the Harpers, one of the major factions of Faerun, but became prideful and lost touch with that organization's ideals. He had a redemption arc, however, in which he killed Moander, the Faerunian god of rot and decay, and for that he ascended to godhood. So he's a rather new god, and he's a dual god, whose divine portfolio includes Moander's old portfolio of rot and corruption, representing his excessive pride and fall from grace, as well as rebirth and renewal, representing his transformation into a hero and savior. His realm is called Fermata. The Seelie Court is quite similar to the Court of Stars, perhaps too similar. It's also home to Fae, it's also a Twilight Forest realm, and it also moves around. However, where the Court of Stars does contain other Fae, it is first and foremost an Eladrin realm, whereas the Seelie Court is for all Fae. And rather than just moving around the 3 layers of Arborea, the Seelie Court wanders all of the 3 chaotic good planes. I'm putting it in this video, though, because Arborea is the middle plane between the 3, and because it's the most Fae-like. So I imagine the Seelie Court shows up in Arborea more often than Isgard or the Beastlands. Another similarity is that in later editions, the Seelie Court is in the Feywild, further robbing Arborea of its Fey characteristics. The Seelie Court is ruled by Titania, the Fairy Queen, and it changes to suit her mood. It's most often a calm woodland whose glades sparkle with moonlight dew. But if she's angry, violent storms erupt that shake the trees and send the fairy folk running. And sometimes the forest glows with gentle sunlight, but not often. The Seelie Court can refer to the realm itself, or it can refer to the fairy pantheon that make up the court. The inner court, or inner circle, consists of Titania and 5 other gods: Oberon, Veranestra, Dav, Skelly, and Ecthiarn, while all the rest make up the fringes of the court, or outer circle, never involving themselves deeply in the court's ever-twisting politics and intrigue. There are no towns or even buildings in the realm. Usually when a realm contains a whole pantheon, each god has their own sub-realm. But that's not the case in the Seelie Court, for the most part. The inner circle resides in a glade surrounded by magic walls, and the outer circle dwell in thickets or mushroom-lined underground halls where many of the petitioners live. Aside from the gods, the Seelie Court is populated by all sorts of sylvan and fey creatures, such as pixies, brownies, leprechauns, satyrs, spriggans, sprites, dryads, korrid, unicorns, kilmulis, treants, fairy dragons, centaurs, and more. Like the Court of Stars, time is weird here. But in the Court of Stars, time is frozen. Here, time fluctuates on a whim, sometimes moving very slowly so that only a few hours have passed within the Seelie Court, while outside, decades have gone by, for example. Other times it moves quickly, and maybe hundreds of years pass within while it's only been a day outside. So you never know how much time you might lose when you enter this realm. And I would personally add that sometimes time flows backward, so that you might enter the Seelie Court and then exit into the past. And while the Seelie Court is good overall, the Fae are tricksy, and those tricks are often dangerous or even cruel by mortal standards. Visitors should beware to never eat food offered to them while here, because to accept food is to pledge fealty to the one who offers it, such that you're compelled to obey any command they might make of you. There are a few ways to break this magic, though, such as by using a wish spell or by appealing to a higher-ranking fairy who actually agrees to help you. But another way to break Fae magic is to outsmart it, like by tricking your fairy master into commanding an impossible task. Another thing to be wary of is gifts, for if you accept a fairy's gift, they're entitled to demand one in return, and you might not like what they ask you to give. Another common Fae trick is to ask for your name, only for you to realize later that you don't know it anymore, because they took it from you, perhaps even granting them power over you. Titania is the goddess of fairies, friendship, and magic, and ruler of the Seelie Court. She's a beautiful, imperious, and fickle goddess. She's sort of a mother figure for all the fairies that live here, and desires nothing more than for her subjects than that they live forever in blissful happiness. She's even gentle and kind to the members of the Unseelie Court, as she wishes to bring them back into the fold. The Unseelie Court, also called the Gloaming Court, is a twisted, evil reflection of the Seelie Court in Pandemonium, ruled by Titania's sister, the Queen of Air and Darkness, fairy goddess of magic, darkness, and murder. Oberon is the fairy god of beasts and animals. He's the husband of Titania, though they both take many other lovers. Titania does it because she's carefree and promiscuous, where Oberon mostly does it in an attempt to get back at her, which never really works. Though he is part of the inner court, he spends a lot of his time avoiding the court politics, hunting instead, though chasing or tracking might be a better word, because he doesn't kill his quarry. Veranestra is the fairy goddess of charm and beauty, and is the patron deity of dryads, nymphs, and sylphs. She's the daughter of Titania, and shares her mother's beauty, and likely exceeds it. She's a jealous and vain goddess, but she's also quite wise. And while she is also a member of the inner court, she does have her own bower in the forest, full of silver branches and willows, and decorated with jewels and mirrors to better admire her own beauty. Dav is the fairy god of song and dance, and patron to satyrs and korrid, which are kind of like dwarf satyrs. He's an extremely self-indulgent god, but he's also a stout guardian. He's a very old god as well, though not older than Titania and Oberon, as he's their son. He's also a great friend to druids, having helped build the very first druidic stone circles to ever exist. Skelly is the fairy god of trickery and illusion, and patron to leprechauns. He's a trickster and the court jester of the Seelie Court. He's said to have been birthed from a magical plant in Arvandor, the realm of the elven gods. Ecthiarn is the fairy god of healing, loyalty, and protection, and the patron deity of unicorns and pegasi, as he's both rolled into one. He's often considered the son of Coriel, the wandering god of the Kirin, which are like scaly unicorns. He hasn't been known to let many people ride him, but those who have include Oberon, Fenella, and Hanali Selenil of the Elven Pantheon. He can sometimes be seen flying the skies high above the realm. Cuevan, Amantianzian, Fenella, Nair Skiak, and sometimes Scarret are the gods of the Outer Circle. Cuevan is the fairy god of food and friendship, and patron to the Kilmulis, which are these thin little guys with big anteater noses. He's a shy god and prefers to lounge about eating sweets, but he occasionally gets a burst of curiosity and wanders the forest for a few minutes. Amantianzian is the fairy god of trees and magic, and the patron deity of treants. He is the sage of the Seelie court. The wind, birds, and the songs of elves deliver information to his branches, and his roots are so deep that he hears murmurings of beings deep within other worlds, and he never forgets anything he hears. It's said that he has always existed, and that his roots are curled about a magical crystal of unknown origin. Fenella is the fairy goddess of communication and sorority, and the patron deity of Swanmaze. She was originally a mortal ranger who helped the Sylvan races fight off a great incursion of the Unseelie court, dying in the process. Titania raised her from the dead, brought her into the Seelie court, and turned her into a Swanmay, which is a shapeshifter who can turn into a swan. Nair Skiak is the fairy god of mischief and patron to pseudo-dragons and fairy dragons. He's a child of Io, or perhaps you'd like to pronounce it Io, the creator dragon god, but he doesn't concern himself with the affairs of other dragons. He's a prankster who's both pompous and self-effacing, and his endless facetiousness is so much that it sometimes irritates even the other gods of the Seelie court. Scarret is the fairy god of community and balance, and the patron deity of centaurs. In some ways, he can be considered a member of the outer circle of the Seelie court, as he does work with the other gods to protect Sylvan lands, but he actually has his own realm in the Beastlands, and so is probably only ever found in the Seelie court when it's within that plane. Olympus is a realm of abundant olive groves, lush hills, fertile vineyards and orchards, pleasant seaside towns, ancient temples, woodlands filled with satyrs and nymphs, and sloping mountains, the greatest of which is, of course, Mount Olympus. The overall character of the realm is quite similar to Arborea as a whole. It's a place of unbridled emotions, where passion is celebrated, even what we think of as negative emotions, such as lust or rage. The main difference is, of course, the overt Greek theme to everything, as well as the vibe of all-or-nothing heroism. Succeed or die in glory, but don't return in shame. Life in Olympus is often epic, but short, as the people here are likely to meet their end in the jaws of some mythical monster or at the hands of the capricious, jealous, and petty gods or nature spirits, who are especially prominent, powerful, and demanding here. The nature spirits' demands for tribute rival that of the gods, and ignoring them brings bad luck. In game terms, the spirits are prone to do such things as reduce your speed by half, give you a -3 penalty to saving throws, or worse. This realm is home to several towns, but the greatest three are Arcanos, Thalassia, and Polyceptolon. Arcanos is the largest, and is widely known for its Amazonian warriors who roam the whole plain and are frequently sought out to defeat the monsters that occasionally plague Arborea's seaside towns, such as Thalassia, which is not to be confused with the same-sounding layer of Elysium with only a slightly different spelling. It's a town of fisherfolk perched on steep, sunny hills. Polyceptolon is a town of scholars, philosophers, and the slaves who attend to them. The Fraternity of Order has a strong presence in this town, which is surprising considering they're all about law. You won't find anything more advanced than Bronze Age technology in any of these towns, or anywhere in the realm for that matter, at least for the most part, as figures like Hephaestus and Daedalus do make some nifty contraptions, like the wings Icarus used to fly, for example. And the people of this realm prefer it that way, and the philosophers tout the purity of a simple life. The biggest and most obvious landmark in Olympus is Mount Olympus. This is one of the 5 great paths, the others being Yggdrasil, the river Oceanus, the river Styx, and the Infinite Staircase. Mount Olympus connects Arborea with all of the parts of the Greek underworld in Gehenna, the Grey Waste, and Carcery, as well as the astral plane and all of the prime material worlds where the Greek gods are worshipped. The gods take credit for turning Mount Olympus into this great conduit, but some are skeptical and claim that Mount Olympus contained these portals long before the gods got there. The realm of Olympus is, of course, home to the Olympian pantheon, the gods who in Greek mythology reside on Mount Olympus. Here, that explicitly includes Zeus, Aphrodite, Apollo, Ares, Artemis, Athena, Demeter, Dionysus, Hephaestus, Hera, Hermes, Nike, Pan, Tyche, Rhea, Prometheus, and sometimes Poseidon, but probably many other lesser gods as well. And there's also Nebulon, one of the gnome gods who splits his time between here and Bytopia. Keep in mind that when D&D uses gods from real-world mythology, there's often some differences between the D&D version and the real-world version. But for whatever differences there may be, the personality of the Greek gods is pretty much the same. They're selfish and deeply flawed and chaotic and unreliable and kind of evil. That's actually something I really like about Greek mythology. The gods are representations of the unpredictable natural world and the complexities of the human psyche, rather than being an image of perfection. I like this because all gods are inescapably reflections of the human psyche, as they are the creations of humans, but they're often not regarded as such. They're regarded as representations of the ideal. But in Greek mythology, the Greeks don't believe this. They know the gods are flawed and selfish. They're not projecting their own flaws onto the universe and calling them perfection. The Greek gods were critiqued as well as worshipped. The Greeks made offerings to the gods because they had to convince them to be helpful. If you think about it, it doesn't make much sense to make offerings to a good or perfect god, because a good god wouldn't need convincing to help you. So it's all well and good and interesting to say that the Greek gods in real-world mythology aren't good. But it's another matter when we're talking about them in Planescape. Because this brings us to the moral quandary that I briefly mentioned earlier. If the gods, particularly the Greek gods, are emotional and petty and vindictive and even sometimes cruel and use mortals as toys to be played with roughly and then discarded, how can they be said to be good? How can they belong in this plane? At best, you could say that they're well-meaning, but easily overcome by fits of violent emotion that lead them to do regrettable things. The gods have little to no concern for the well-being of their worshippers. They demand appeasement through sacrifice, or else. And even if you do appease them, you're still not guaranteed to be safe from them. It's true that not every god has to match the alignment of the plane they live in, especially where pantheons are concerned. The influence of a pantheon as a whole can keep a god or three in a plane who would otherwise not belong due to a mismatched alignment. But it seems like nearly the entire pantheon has a mismatched alignment. Only 3 of them are chaotic good themselves, and only 4 of them are some other variation of good. And if you know anything about Zeus, then you know he's chaotic neutral at best. This book lists him as true neutral. So what makes them chaotic good as a whole if they're such a mixed bag of alignments? Why are they in this plane? I suppose if they're all going to stick together in some plane, then they're not going to fit in wherever you put them. But honestly, they might make the most sense in the Outlands. Yes, the gods of Arborea, including the Olympians, have a commitment to fighting against evil, so I guess they're good in that sense. But they themselves are actually kind of evil. So it's less like good guys fighting evil guys, and more like slightly evil guys fighting really evil guys, or maybe neutral guys fighting evil guys. The most obvious example of this would be when the Olympians overthrew the Titans, casting them out of Arborea and imprisoning them in Tartarus, which in D&D is Carcery. But honestly, I don't even know what makes the Titans evil. That just seems like Greek god propaganda. And the Titans did used to inhabit Arborea after all, so they were probably good. Though I guess the Olympians live here now, and they don't seem to belong, so I guess that doesn't necessarily mean much. But the Titans strike me as pretty much the same in personality as the Olympians. They just happened to lose the war, and history is written by the victors. Anyway, I have a few possible ways to resolve this issue. You could say that while most of the Greek gods don't really belong here, they believe they do. belief matters in Planescape. The power of belief isn't so strong that an evil person can simply believe their way into a good afterlife, but gods are obviously much, much stronger than mortals, so maybe they can. Or maybe one god alone can't pull it off, but a dozen or so of them together can. Or you could say that while only 3 of the gods are actually chaotic good, the combined alignment of all the Greek gods also works out to be chaotic good. Sure, you've got some neutral or evil gods in there, but if you mix all their behavior together, the end result is chaotic goodness. So perhaps you could say that the Greek gods are actually overall good enough to belong here, but I think being a constant threat to the people of Arborea, and knowingly so, mind you, is enough to rule that out. But one thing that's interesting is that this quandary sheds some light on a different quandary we faced earlier, the hedonism of the Arboreans. You see, one of the reasons, likely a big reason, but certainly not the whole reason, that the Arboreans are such wild and unremitting pleasure seekers, embracing the I'm here for a good time, not a long time mindset, is because of the fact that they're all too aware that life can end or be completely ruined at any moment due to the interference of the gods. They've got to get in all their living quick and hard, because who knows when mayhem will strike. Comparing oneself favorably to the gods, failing to make a sacrifice, giving an insufficient sacrifice, breaking an oath, all of these things will provoke the wrath of the gods of Arborea. And in Olympus, the gods are even more easily provoked. Zeus, as I'm sure you know, is the leader of the Olympian pantheon. He's the Greek god of thunder, the heavens, law, and leadership. So even in a chaotic pantheon, there's still law, which is kind of in line with what I was saying way earlier in the video, about how while Arborea is chaotic, there are still threads of law and tradition interwoven through that chaos. Zeus is the son of Cronus, the leader of the previously ruling Titan pantheon. Gaia, the primordial goddess of the earth, foretold that Cronus' children would overthrow him, like how he overthrew his own father, Uranus. To prevent this, Cronus ate each of his children as soon as they were born. But with the 6th child, his sister wife Rhea tricked him and offered him a stone instead of baby Zeus. When Zeus was full grown, he freed his siblings from Cronus' stomach, and together they battled against the Titans in a 10-year war known as the Titanomachy, which only ended due to the help of the Cyclops and the Hecatonkieres, or 100-handers. Zeus has ruled ever since then, though he's not a very hands-on ruler, which makes sense considering the chaotic nature of the Greek pantheon. He really only steps in on the other gods' business to discipline them when they're squabbling with each other. Zeus's subrealm sits at the highest point on Mount Olympus. It's a radiant citadel of polished marble and gold, where his wife Hera, the goddess of marriage, women, family, and childbirth, and in D&D, intrigue, rules alongside him. Though he often takes on the forms of various animals to secretly slip out and go violate some unsuspecting dryad, or anything that moves, really. Many heroes and demigods have been created in this way. Aphrodite is the Greek goddess of love, lust, and beauty, though it might be more accurate to call her a Titan, depending on which mythology you go by. Titan is just the name of a particular group of gods anyway. The first ruler of the cosmos in Greek mythology is Uranus, and the 12 children he and Gaia had are the Titans, at least the main Titans. Actually, they had more than 12 children, the other ones being the Cyclops and the 100-handers. So I guess you could say the Titans were the children that weren't monstrous. Anyway, when Cronos usurped his father Uranus, he castrated him, and Uranus's sperm spilled into the ocean, which formed into a sea foam that in turn formed into Aphrodite. So, yeah. That's why you would consider her the 13th Titan, or maybe the 14th because of Dione. Aphrodite's other origin story is that she's the daughter of Zeus and Dione. Aphrodite is sometimes considered to be the wife of Hephaestus, and sometimes the wife or partner of Ares. Her subrealm is a palace of mirror-like quartz and gems where every surface reflects her beauty. She shares the mystical pool of Evergold, which the Greeks call Kanathis. Apollo is the Greek god of light, prophecy, music, and healing. Apollo is often considered a sun god, but he wasn't always. Sometime around the 5th century BCE, he started to get syncretized with Helios, the earlier Greek god of the sun. Apollo is the twin of Artemis, and the son of Zeus and Leto, the goddess of motherhood. He's the most widely worshipped Greek god after Zeus, likely because his godly portfolio is so large. He's also the goddess of archery and poetry and disease. Apollo's subrealm contains a temple of beaten gold that radiates sunlight, as well as an amphitheater where sensates can often be found reciting poetry. Ares is the Greek god of war, killing, and strife. In D&D, he's chaotic evil. He's the son of Zeus and Hera. Ares' subrealm is a gloomy fortress of bone near the portal defile, a chasm that holds the gates to all the prime material worlds where the Greek gods are worshipped. His subrealm is one of the very few places in Arborea, or perhaps the only place, where you can find evil petitioners. Those who have pledged their loyalty to Ares are warriors with shaven heads and a literal bloodthirst, as they drink the blood of the foes they slay to make themselves more powerful. Artemis is the goddess of hunting, wild beasts, and childbirth. She's the twin of Apollo, and even though her divine portfolio includes childbirth, she's a maiden goddess, refusing to take any partners. She prefers the company of wild animals and nature to that of people or the other gods, and she doesn't really have a specific sub-realm in Olympus. Instead, she wanders the entire breadth of the realm, hunting only for food and not sport. But I've gotta wonder, why does a goddess need to hunt for food? For one thing, gods are immortal beings and don't need mortal food to survive, and that's true in D&D as well as Greek mythology more generally. For another thing, even if the gods did need food, you might think that's what animal sacrifices are for, though more about that in a bit. And lastly, the Greek gods are known for eating nectar and ambrosia, though they don't even need this to survive. So why would Artemis need to hunt? If she's hunting, it must then either be for sport, which would greatly anger the nature spirits, or perhaps she only hunts monsters to keep the land safe. And we all know there's more than enough monsters at Olympus to go around. Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom, crafts, and war. Athena is the child of Zeus and Metis, the pre-Olympian goddess of wisdom and Zeus's first wife. Zeus learned of a prophecy in which Metis would bear him a son that would overthrow him, just as he overthrew his father Cronus, and Cronus overthrew his father Uranus before him. To prevent this, he learned from Cronus' mistake, and instead of waiting until the child was born to eat them, he ate Metis while she was pregnant. But eating gods doesn't work very well, apparently, because Athena was born anyway. Zeus started having terrible headaches, so Hephaestus split his head open with an axe, and out popped Athena, fully formed. Like Artemis, Athena has sworn a vow of chastity, and while both her and Ares are gods of war, they represent different aspects of it. Ares presides over the bloodshed and violence of war, while Athena presides over the strategy and tactics of it. Athena's subrealm is right across from Ares, and looks much the opposite. Where his is dark and blood-stained bone filled with savage warriors, hers is a place of bright and shining iron filled with philosophers and generals. Demeter is the Greek goddess of agriculture. She is the sister of Zeus, one of the 6 original Olympians. She was also Zeus's wife for a time, and together they had Persephone. In Greek myth, not doing incest is weird. Later, Persephone got abducted by Hades, though it was more of a surprise arranged marriage because Zeus told Hades to do it, and Demeter was very unhappy about this. To placate her, Hades agreed that Persephone could leave the underworld for half of the year. When Persephone and Demeter are together, Demeter's happy, but when they're apart, Demeter's upset, and withdraws her agricultural gift from the world. Plants wither, grass dies, flowers don't bloom, and crops don't grow. So according to one version of Greek mythology, this is why there are seasons. Demeter's subrealm is a cottage in the midst of an immense field of golden grain. Her petitioners are farmers who work the land, and while it seems like a hard life, they seem to love it. Dionysus is the Greek god of mirth and madness in D&D. Of course, he's also the god of wine, festivity, and theater. There are many versions and contradicting stories of gods in Greek myth, and even more so for Dionysus. The version D&D uses is that Dionysus is the son of Zeus and a mortal named Semele. But while Dionysus was still in the womb, Semele beheld the true form of Zeus, which instantly vaporized her, leaving only the half-formed fetus of Dionysus behind. Zeus then stitched baby Dionysus into his own thigh to complete his gestation, and when Zeus gave birth out of his thigh, Dionysus emerged as a fully formed adult. But Hera was jealous about Zeus cheating on her with Semele, so she cursed Dionysus with madness for a time. Dionysus is also called Bacchus, and it's thought by some that he created the Bacchae, though Pan is also blamed for their existence as well, and some say the goddesses of Brightwater are behind them. Whatever the case, Pan and Dionysus certainly are their patrons, though it's possible that the Bacchae weren't created intentionally. Perhaps it's simply due to the presence of all these gods of revelry and hedonism throughout the plane, coalescing into an untamable and infectious force that overtakes the minds of petitioners. Anyway, Dionysus' subrealm is a palace in the middle of a vineyard where the grapes are always ripe. When the Bacchae aren't roaming in a crazed hedonistic rampage around the whole lair, they can often be found here. The constant parties that take place here are so depraved that they make the gilded hall of the sensates look tame by comparison. Hecate doesn't reside in Olympus, but I want to give her a quick mention anyway. She's the Greek goddess of magic, the moon, and liminal spaces, and she keeps 2 realms, one in the 9 hells and one in the Grey Waste. But the thing about Hecate is she's often depicted as 3-aspected, or triple-bodied. So if she's a triple goddess, why does she have 2 realms? It would be more fitting if she had 3. Plus, she controls the use of necromancy in Olympus, so I think it would make a lot of sense if she had a sub-realm here too. Of course, in D&D she's evil, but then again so is Ares, and he lives here. Hephaestus is the Greek god of the forge, smithing, and crafts. He's the son of Hera, who got sick of all of Zeus's extramarital escapades and decided to have a baby that was fully her own. When Hephaestus was born, Zeus threw him off Mount Olympus, making Hephaestus lame forever after. But Zeus cooled down and accepted him into the pantheon, where he now crafts Zeus's thunderbolts better than the Cyclops ever did. Hephaestus' subrealm is a great forge in the heart of a volcano. Hermes is the Greek god of travel, trade, thievery, gambling, and running. In myth, he's the emissary of the gods, and also a psychopomp, one who guides souls to the afterlife. In D&D, he's one of the 3 Greek gods who are actually chaotic good, alongside Aphrodite and Apollo. Hermes is the son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. On the day he was born, he stole Apollo's cattle, invented the lyre, and then traded the lyre to Apollo in exchange for keeping the cattle, instantly earning him recognition from the other gods and a place within the pantheon as a charming and crafty character. His subrealm is hidden inside Mount Olympus, a thieves' den for gamblers and travelers. While you're likely to get robbed here, you're at least guaranteed safety while you're here, which is rare for Olympus. Nike is the Greek goddess of victory. For some reason in D&D she's the sister of Eris, the goddess of discord, and has co-ownership of the apples of discord. In Greek myth, Eris wasn't invited to a wedding that the gods were attending because she causes problems wherever she goes. Unhappy about this, she showed up anyway, bringing a golden apple to be awarded to the fairest goddess. Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena immediately began to fight over it, and demanded that Zeus decide which of them was the most beautiful. But Zeus wanted to stay out of it, and delegated the task to a mortal from Troy named Paris, who Zeus trusted for his good judgment. Each of the goddesses bribed Paris, but he liked Aphrodite's offer best, which was the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. The problem was that Helen was already married to the king of Sparta, but Paris absconded with Helen anyway, which resulted in the Trojan War. But Nike and Eris still offer up the golden apples to people sometimes, though Nike does it as a just reward for victory. The first bite cures all disease, the second bite restores youth, and the third bite makes you immortal, but not invulnerable. Nike is often called upon by Athena or Ares to ride with them in battle, assuring the victory of whichever side she chooses. She doesn't have her own sub-realm within Olympus, and instead has quarters within the palaces of both Ares and Athena. Pan is the Greek god of nature and passion. He's either the son of Uranus, created from his blood when it spilled onto the earth, the son of Zeus from some unnamed woman, or the son of Hermes, at least according to D&D. According to myth, there's several more possibilities. Whatever the case may be, Pan is a god who looks like a satyr, and he pursues his passions freely and wildly, though within him there's also a great amount of wisdom. He lives on the outer edges of the realm, and only visits Mount Olympus infrequently, for which most of the other gods are thankful. because the revelry he brings with him is exhausting, even for the gods. Tyche is the Greek goddess of good fortune. Her subrealm in Olympus is gradually disappearing, as she's been slowly driven out of the Greek pantheon's ranks, apparently because she had a falling out with her sisters Nike and Eris, who all aren't sisters in real-world myth. It used to be a grand villa and gambling hall, but now it sits dusty and largely empty. Tyche has retreated to the prime material plane, limiting herself to the worship of a single crystal sphere, that of the Forgotten Realms, or Realm Space. There she became part of the Netherese pantheon, and over time became enemies with Moander, the god of decay, who corrupted her with a rose intended to look like a gift from the god Lathander. When Lathander, Selûne, and Azuth, other gods of Realm Space, discovered her corruption and realized they couldn't fix it, they killed her, and from her corpse sprang two new goddesses, Tymora, goddess of good luck, and Beshaba, goddess of bad luck, Tymora's sworn enemy. However, when a god dies, their husk forms in the astral plane, and no one has ever found Tyche's corpse there, so it may be that Tyche didn't die, and instead manifested herself as two goddesses, one good and one evil, to prevent the corruption from completely taking over. Some believe that the Tyche that once was has faded away, and her two manifestations have become completely separate deities. Others believe that Tyche still exists as an underlying force beneath both of these goddesses. Rhea is the Greek goddess of fertility and life. She's actually a Titan, as she's the mother of Zeus and the other original 6 Olympians. Most of the Titans are imprisoned in carcery, but seeing as Rhea was the one that initiated the Titanomachy by tricking Cronus into eating a stone instead of Zeus, she's on the side of the Olympians, and is held in high esteem by them. She doesn't quite have a sub-realm or petitioners, but she does have a grand palace that exceeds the one she had when Cronus was in charge. Prometheus is also listed as having a sub-realm in Olympus, but I'm not sure why. Prometheus is a trickster titan and advocate of humanity. He's best known for stealing fire from the gods to give to the humans, something which angered Zeus greatly. But there's also another story that I find really interesting, where Prometheus tricks Zeus by giving him the choice of 2 sacrificial offerings, one with meat hidden in an ox's stomach, and one of bones slathered in glistening fat. Zeus chose the bones and fat because it looked more pleasing, setting the precedent for how sacrificial offerings should be conducted. Before I read the story, I always figured animal sacrifices were actually a sacrifice. Obviously, it's a bit of a fucked up sacrifice, because really it's the animals that's suffering the most, not you, but still, I figured it was at least giving up something of value to you. But it turns out that it's hardly even a sacrifice at all, because all you burn for the gods is the bones and fat, keeping the meat for yourself. So it's basically just a barbecue. Anyway, Zeus wasn't happy about the fire stealing or the sacrifice trick, so he punished Prometheus by chaining him to a rock and having an eagle eat Prometheus's endlessly regenerating liver forever. But eventually, Heracles freed Prometheus from his punishment, and now I guess Zeus and Prometheus made up, and he lives in Olympus with the rest of the gods. Poseidon does have a shrine by the sea in Olympus and visits occasionally, but he has a realm of his own in Arborea's second layer, so I'll talk about him in that section. And the last of the gods to reside in Olympus, at least the last of the major gods, is Nebulon. He's actually not even a Greek god at all. He's the gnomish god of inventions and good luck, but he splits his time between here and the realm of the gnomish pantheon in Bytopia called the Golden Hills. While in Olympus, he stays in the forge of Hephaestus, where the two gods often create incredible items together. Arvandor is the realm of the Elven pantheon, who are also called the Seldarine. It's a mystical domain of deep woods and unearthly beauty. Some say it exemplifies Arborea as a whole, with its enormous trees, enchanted forests, untouched wilderness, and carefree passions. But unlike the remote and truly untouched wilderness of Arborea, Arvandor has been tamed. It's just that an elf's idea of a tamed landscape is nearly indistinguishable to what a non-elf would consider wild, as the elves have achieved a level of harmony with nature far beyond that of most races, such that to an elf, there's not nearly so sharp a contrast between civilization and the wild. Naturally, Arvandor is far less pastoral than Olympus, filled with ancient forests that have never been cut, and cathedral-like groves of towering trees. The trees are so large that entire ecosystems of intelligent races such as Aarakocra, Ratatosk, and elves live within the upper canopy. There are a few elf tribes that live their entire lives up in the trees, and have never touched the ground, considering doing so unclean or unlucky. The underbrush is so thick that in many places it's completely impassable, and the darkness of the thickest underbrush hides many dangers, such as giant spiders and living shadows. The elves of the ground take detours around these places, opting to pass through the sunlit meadows. The largest of these forest clearings are often home to gates, the best known one being a gate to Alfheim in Isgard, in a place called Ingmar Brook. There's also a conduit called the Roaring Gate in a narrow gully. Anyone who enters the water gets washed away to the Beastlands. But there aren't that many gates in Arvandor. At least, there's not supposed to be. Even still, the elves are constantly on guard for incursions from other planes, especially from the minions of Lolth or the slavers of the Unseelie Court, whose invasions are heralded by the arrival of the ill winds of pandemonium that tear the leaves from the trees. Arvandor is a realm of mystery, even to the elves that make it their home. Only the gods know its secrets, and they may not even know them all. After all, this wasn't always their home. As I mentioned before, the elven gods came from Isgard and wrested control of this place from the gods of the giants, so the scattered ruins of ancient giant strongholds can be found here and there throughout the realm, penetrating through the forest or dominating the glades, their size matching the larger-than-life atmosphere of the plain. Many of these ruined giant cities and halls are said to contain marvelous treasures left behind when the giants fled. But not all of the giants are gone, and they can sometimes be found walking through the wood, their footfalls creating new meadows and glades that flower all year round. Similarly to the Court of Stars and the Seelie Court, time works differently in Arvandor. It doesn't flow linearly, and when you leave the realm, it's not always when you think you do, though part of this is due to the enchanting effect of the place. Any visitor to Arvandor without elven blood must make a wisdom check, and those who fail become entranced with the beauty of the realm, singing, dancing, and indulging themselves in the joys of life along with all the other elves for weeks or months without even realizing how long it's been. The longer you've been here, the harder it is to leave, so visitors often need to be dragged out of the realm by their friends, and then kept under guard until the desire to go back has waned. I like to imagine that it never truly goes away. In 4th edition, where Arborea doesn't exist, Arvandor is an astral dominion, which basically just means it's a realm floating in the astral sea. Here, it's an archipelago of steep, forest-covered islands surrounded by a wall of mist that marks its borders. There are 6 main islands, but dozens of smaller ones all over Arvandor's sea. The largest is known as Astera, or Elvenhome, filled with gleaming towers and populated mostly by Ruesti, which are the souls of Eladrin and elves. Remember that in 4th edition, Eladrin are just elves of the Feywild. But let's get back to 2nd edition. As you might expect, Arvandor has almost no towns. The elves mostly prefer to live in glades, groves, and giant trees. The most well-known of these is Grandfather Oak, a giant tree with a town in its branches. Though the clueless don't know that, so when they hear the elves talking about Grandfather Oak, they assume it's a person. And sometimes the way the elves talk about the town, it does seem like a person, because they refer to the town as him or our grandfather. The clueless, by the way, is a term for primes that don't know jack shit about the Outer Planes, which is most primes. Grandfather Oak is the greatest and oldest tree in Arvandor. There are homes built on top of the branches, as well as chambers carved out from the trunk. And it's not all just living spaces either, but there's also food growing on vines and orchards on the great tree. Water and building materials are pulled up from the ground with pulleys and winches, but they also gather rainwater and store it in huge collection barrels connected to pipes that run throughout the tree, allowing for running water in the town. The leaves of the tree are strong enough to hold the weight of a dozen elves each. The town is known for its exceptional wood carving, and it used to be renowned for its spider's silk, but that was before Lolth was banished from the Seldarine. The oldest hollows in the trunk have become overgrown with bark, and many of these are the old workshops of Lolth's followers. No one ever enters these, and it's unknown what dark secrets might linger inside. And perhaps predictably, fire is a dangerous thing to use here, so its use is restricted to a few areas where boulders have been brought up from the ground to serve as platforms for things like cooking and metalwork. Because fire's mostly not allowed, the tree is lit by soft, golden magical lights at night. Grandfather Oak is run by a truly ancient treant named Moss Among His Roots, Wind in His Leaves. He's extremely long-winded and slow, taking a day just to answer a yes or no question, and only other treants and some elves have the patience for him. So visitors and anything that requires quick action is brought before a clever half-elf warrior named Trilomir Evensong, whose judgments are recognized as binding within the town limits. The Great Tree is also home to a town on the ground, living among Grandfather's roots. They keep watch to protect the village far above, but they have their own government and laws, appealing to the High King of the Grey Elves rather than Trilomir. Another notable location is the Apprentices' Reverie, the greatest gathering of elven learning in Arvandor, where ancient elves teach and ponder questions of philosophy, mathematics, and planar geometry. The gods of Arvandor are more good and more chaotic than the Greek pantheon, although this book says that the Greek pantheon is more chaotic than any pantheon save the Norse. I would personally side with the elves being more chaotic, as all of their gods are actually chaotic, where the Greeks can't say the same, and they certainly are more good, and they also seem to fit in here better, as most of the elven deities are specifically chaotic good in alignment. The elven gods don't really participate in the day-to-day governance of the realm, and instead leave that to the high kings and queens who rule over the 5 kingdoms of elf petitioners, those being the high elves, grey elves, sylvan elves, sea elves, and wild elves. The gods have a close relationship to the Seelie court, and they often use the fey creatures of the court as their agents. All the gods are androgynous, and have been known to take on either male or female forms, but nonetheless, they all have a favored gender that they're known by. The Elven Pantheon, or Seldarine, is huge, including 25 members. Most of them live in Arvandor, but not all of them. Corellon Larethian is the elven god of magic, music, the arts, and war. He is the leader of the Seldarine. Legends say that when the gods were dividing up the plains, Corellon Larethian chose the forests as the domain of his people, but Grumsh, chief deity of the orcs, challenged him. They fought for eons, or for a day and a night if you ask the elves, until Corellon finally won. His blood that was spilled from the fight mingled with the tears of the moon and fell upon the soil from which the elves arose. And it is due to this initial struggle that the elves are such a passionate race. While elves often have a reputation for being arrogant, even to the point of supremacy, Corellon himself is quite a humble god, always eager to learn from others. In fact, he sometimes travels around Arvandor in disguise to learn from non-elven visitors to the realm. His subrealm is a magnificent and gigantic marble tower in the heart of Arvandor, called the Many-Splendored, with an elvish name that I know I'm going to mispronounce, so I won't even try. Aside from the central throne room, none of the rooms inside the tower are ever the same twice. In 4th edition, Corellon instead resides in a palace known as Nath Seldari, whose walls of enchanted mist ward away intruders. Airdrie Fania is the elven goddess of air, weather, and avians, and is the patron deity of Averials, which are winged elves. But she's also worshipped by other races besides elves, such as Kirin, Lamasu, Aarakocra, and all intelligent birds. She's practically the embodiment of freedom and impulse, and refuses to remain in one place for too long. Fittingly, her subrealm moves around. This book has a weird mention that her realm is on the border of Isgard and Arborea, as if the two planes are actually physically connected and there really is a border. But this book clears it up by saying that it's a philosophical border, not a literal border. So what I take that to mean is that Airdrie Fania and her realm sit on the fence, alignment-wise, between the two realms. And that alignment must be ever-changing, because sometimes her realm is within Arvandor, and other times it leaves and even wanders off into Alfheim in Isgard. It's a place of strong wind that forces all but the best flyers to the ground. or a place of calm, cool breezes where all creatures of flight can partake in the free skies. It all depends on how she's feeling at any given time. But it's not all just air. She also has a floating palace. Deep Sashalas is the elven god of knowledge, beauty, and magic, and patron to the sea elves. While he is a member of the Seldarine, he's also the leader of a different pantheon, the Asathelfanare, which is a group of non-human sea gods. Like Erdrifania, his realm also moves around. It's sometimes within the sparkling sea at the edge of Arvandor, or somewhere in the second layer of Ossa. I would guess that it's more often in Ossa, so I'll talk more about him and his realm in the next section. Erevan Ilasir is the elven god of mischief, change, and patron to elf rogues. He's a real trickster, and is said to be one of the most fun-loving gods in the multiverse. He's even more chaotic and fickle than the rest of the pantheon, and many elves consider him too unpredictable to be worth their devotion. But he can be relied upon to come to the aid of the Seldarine when they need him. Erevan spends a lot of his time outside of Arvandor, hanging out with or pulling pranks on other gods of mischief. But when he is in Arvandor, he can be found in a place called the Gnarl. The Gnarl is the name of a root of Yggdrasil that touches part of Arvandor, as well as the name of the town built around that root. It's a town of Ratatosk and elves, and some people think the Ratatosk were created by Erevan, because many of them worship him. His subrealm is a shifting palace of wood, stone, and crystal. Each time you visit, you find that the rooms have all rearranged themselves, a bit like Coralon's tower, except there it happens while you're still inside as you walk from room to room. Erevan's palace is full of tricks and traps as an invitation for people to test their wits and skill, though none of the traps will result in any serious harm. Hanali Selenil is the elven goddess of love and beauty. She embodies the joy in the elf spirit, and is quite friendly as far as gods go. Her subrealm is a magnificent crystal palace of unearthly splendor, centered around Evergold, the fountain of youth, at least when it's here, because as I mentioned earlier, she shares it with a few other gods of beauty, such as Aphrodite, Suni, and Freya. According to one source, Evergold actually exists here and in Brightwater at the same time, acting as a portal between the two realms. Hanali's palace is constructed with such precision that placing a single candle in the proper manner can illuminate the entire place. The crystal walls are opaque from the outside, but transparent from the inside. Labellus Anoreth is the elven god of time and longevity. He measures out the lifespans of the elves and decides when they will end, and he's responsible for the elves' ability to be mostly unaffected by age up until their deaths. It's said that he traded one of his eyes for the ability to peer through time. His subrealm is known as the Vanishing Tower. Most of the time it can't be seen, either invisible or perhaps incorporeal or in some demiplane or pocket dimension. It's said that the tower's appearance is an omen of trouble or great things to come. There's also a chapel dedicated to Labellus Anoreth between the roots of Grandfather Oak. Sehanine Moonbow is the elven goddess of mysticism, dreams, death, journeys, and transcendence. She's either the wife or the daughter of Coralon Larethian, depending on who you ask. Though maybe she's both. Hey, the Greeks are cool with it. In the elven creation myth, it was her tears that mixed with Coralon's blood to give life to the elves. And the elves have not forgotten this. So she is very actively worshipped, and she's the most powerful of the elven goddesses. She watches over the dreams of the elves, keeping them safe while in their trance-like state that they enter rather than sleeping. She also sends them visions, especially when they're close to death. In this way, she shares some of the power over the elven lifespan with Labellus Anoreth, as she helps transition them from the world of the living to the world of the dead, which is of course right here in Arvandor. To some, there is a distinction between the realms of the gods, which is Arvandor, and the realm of the elven dead, which is called Erenath, but they're actually one and the same. It should be noted that elf petitioners don't always stay petitioners, as elves can reincarnate. Sehanine Moonbow makes sure that when they do, they move along to a better form. She doesn't have a subrealm of her own, and shares the many-splendored tower with Coralon Larethian. By the way, the three goddesses, Erdrifania, Hanali Selenil, and Sehanine Moonbow are sometimes considered three aspects of one god named Angoroth. Solanor Thelandira is the elven god of archery and hunting. He's said to be the best archer in the entire multiverse, and it's not just elves saying that. He's also a god of nature, so his role is to maintain the balance between civilization and wilderness, between instinct and knowledge, and savagery and domesticity. His subrealm is called the Pale Tree, a region of thick forests and quick-flowing streams. The Pale Tree itself is a huge white tree in a grove of deepest green. The tree's silver leaves are thought to have mystical properties and are prized across the realm and beyond. While the realm doesn't move, Solanor certainly does. He's often not here, instead traveling all over the realm hunting for creatures that need to be slain, such as invading drow or fae of the Unseelie Court. Rilifane Ralathiel is the elven god of woodlands and nature, and patron to druids. He's a quiet and reflective god, the least likely of the Seldarine to act on a whim, and he's sometimes considered to be a giant tree, depending on the source. His subrealm is a region of enormous oaks in the deep forest known as the Oak Grove. Fenmarel Mestarine is the god of feral elves and scapegoats. He's a sullen and serious god, and used to be Lolth's lover, but before she turned him completely to darkness, he turned his back on her. She's never forgiven him for that, and he's never forgiven her for betraying the Seldarine. Even still, he is the outcast of the Seldarine. His subrealm of Fenimar is a quiet glade of deserted woods, the perfect place for those who seek solitude and refuge. But it's only in the World Tree cosmology, where Arvandor is its own plane, that Fenimar can be found here. In Planescape's Great Wheel cosmology, it's in Limbo. Eilistrae is the drow goddess of beauty, moonlight, song, dance, swordwork, and hunting. She's the daughter of Lolth, and being a drow deity, she belongs to the Dark Seldarine. But she's the only good member of that pantheon. Like Fenmarel, the World Tree cosmology places her in Arvandor, but in the Great Wheel cosmology, her realm is in Isgard. Mithrian Sarath is the elven god of protection, abjuration magic, and mythals. Mythals are powerful spells of elven origin that require groups to cast. They ward or even alter reality in large areas, such as cities, preventing certain kinds of magic from being used within, also preventing certain kinds of creatures from entering, and also bolstering certain kinds of magic, all depending on what kind of mythal you create, though their creation usually requires the sacrifice of the lead spellcaster. Mithrian has fallen out of favor over the eons, and his subrealm, a palace known as Mithralan, floats above the ground in Arvandor, warded with mythals, making it completely inaccessible without explicit permission from Mithrian himself. Vandria Gilmadrith is the elven goddess of vigilance, grief, justice, and war. She is the daughter of Corellon Larethian, by his original consort Araushni, now known as Lolth. She used to be carefree and high-spirited, like the other members of the Seldarine. But when her mother betrayed the rest of the Pantheon, Vandria couldn't forgive her or the carnage she caused, and became a serious, sorrowful goddess, and is the only lawful member of the Seldarine. Shevarash is the elven god of vengeance, crusades, and loss. He has a similar story to Vandria, and is also rather serious and brooding for an elven god. He has an intense hatred for the drow, and has sworn never to laugh nor smile until Lolth and all her followers are destroyed. Kirith Sotheril is the elven goddess of magic, specifically divination and enchantment magic. This source claims she's a goddess of Elysium, but this source puts her in Arborea. Malira Taralin is the elven goddess of songwriting and the fine arts, and patron to bards and lovers. She's the daughter of Hanali Selenil, and shares a subrealm with her. Ereleth Letharanil is the elven god of light, which includes starlight, moonlight, sunlight, and twilight. His subrealm is known as the House of the Glowing Stars. Naralis Anilor is the elven god of healing, suffering, and death. He is one of the few death gods who isn't malevolent or uncaring, along with Sehanine Moonbow, who he serves. Just like Kirith Sotheril, he's either a god of Elysium or Arborea, depending on the source. Sarula Ilyin is the elven god of lakes, streams, nixies, and water magic. Her subrealm is at the bottom of a huge lake called Brethanion, where she keeps a glass and marble palace. Eladrin Leothiel is the elven god of orchards, gardens, and the harvest. He represents the abundance of nature and its ability to provide for those who live in harmony with it. Alabal Lorfaril is the elven god of hedonism, mirth, magic, and revelry, and is the youngest of the Seldarine. Neither him nor Eladrin have described realms. There's also Daral Firecloak, Tethrin Viralde, Tarsalus Mionidwin, Relivar Danuvian, and Alethrian Druana, but none of them reside in Arvandor. Lastly, there's Lolth, the leader of the Dark Seldarine, goddess of spiders, evil, and darkness, and patron deity of the Drow. Of course, her realm isn't here, it's in the Abyss, but it wasn't always this way, and she's an important figure in the history of the Seldarine, so I think she's worth mentioning. She used to be known as Araushni, the elven goddess of destiny and artisans, and was Corellon Lorethian's original consort. But then she betrayed him and the rest of the Seldarine by helping Corellon's arch-nemesis, the orc god Grumsh, try to kill Corellon. She failed, and then she gathered an army and tried to take control of Arvandor. She failed at that, too, and for her betrayal was transformed into a hideous spider creature by the Seldarine and was banished into the Abyss. Even still, her old subrealm in Arvandor, known as Lolth's Grove, remains. Once an autumn grove of silver-stemmed trees, now it's a cursed place of dead trees, a foul spring of black sludge, and the banshees who were once Lolth's followers. All animals avoid the place, except for spiders, which grow to enormous size. Unfortunately for travelers, there's a portal to the gate town of Sylvania right next to Lolth's Grove. Ossa is the second layer of Arborea, and it's much lesser known than the first layer. The entire layer is an infinite sea, with only a few small islands here and there. However, 3rd edition says it has no islands at all. It's a shallow sea, for the most part, no more than 3 feet deep, except for in great chasms that open up in random places throughout the sea. But I think the 3 feet deep thing is not there in 3rd edition as well. Ossa has many names. To the elves, it's known as Aqualor. The Selkies call it the Endless River, and the creatures of Amonthis and Pelion call it the Green Sea or the Abiding Sea. One reason that the lower layers of Arborea are so much lesser known than Olympus is because they're just much harder to get to. There's not many portals that lead to Ossa, but there are a few pretty reliable ways to find this place. You could visit Poseidon's shrine in the realm of Olympus, or you could enter the gate in Deep Sashalas' realm when it's visiting Arvandor, or use the gate in the Sparkling Sea when his realm isn't there. And I'm sure you could also find conduits in the seas of the first layer. This realm also has a connection to the elemental plane of water, or you could sail the river Oceanus, as Ossa is its final destination, at least usually, as the river sometimes extends all the way to the gates of the moon in Isgard, but this depends on the tides, and the connection is tenuous at best. But the river Oceanus isn't just a one-way flow. While Ossa is technically the river's outflow, there are huge maelstroms that lead directly back to Thalassia in Elysium, where the river Oceanus begins, creating an unending circle. Like the first layer, Ossa's weather is unpredictable, peaceful and calm one moment, and treacherous storms the next. The water itself is also unpredictable, with spontaneously forming underwater currents that can drag you miles off course. Though that's a piece of information from 3rd edition, and it's kind of hard to imagine such powerful currents in water that's only 3 feet deep. The weather and sometimes treacherous waters aren't the only dangers, though. There's also plenty of violent sea creatures that you've got to look out for, such as sea wolves, sirens, sea serpents, storm giants, kelpies, and sharks, and probably plenty of other things. Though I'd assume most of these creatures are more often found in the deeper parts of the layer. There are substantially fewer notable locations in Ossa than there are in Olympus, and only 2 gods. I imagine that there are actually numerous sea gods here, it's just that only 2 gods are explicitly said to be here. There's the town of El Shava, the city of Land Under Wave, Poseidon's realm Coleto, and Deep Sashalas' realm Elvandor. El Shava is an ever-expanding, floating town built on enormous logs and beds of seaweed arranged in a spiral pattern like a nautilus shell. The spiraling streets are paved with coral and shells, and where other cities would have rats scurrying around, El Shava has crabs. Some people believe that the gigantic spiral raft that forms the core of El Shava is actually a living being of some sort, and they could be right, as it does seem to always be growing. The town's buildings resemble giant shells or sea creatures like octopi and fish. There is only one square building in town, and it's the Temple of Deep Sashalas. El Shava is an island of calm among the stormy seas, and is capable of riding out even the biggest hurricanes with minimal damage. The people of Elshava are superficially friendly, but in truth are very suspicious of outsiders. However, it's a prosperous trading town, well positioned between the domains of the Sea Elves and the Land Elves. In fact, half of the town is underwater, as it is a town of the Sea Folk, who are a people of mixed ancestry, partially Sea Elf, partially Mermen, and partially Selkie, which are like were-seals. So many of them have a humanoid form they can use above water, but also a true form they can take on underwater. The people of Elshava love to pursue the history of the sea, and so Elshava is frequently on the move, allowing the citizens to explore the surrounding area for anything of interest, such as the ruins of underwater cities believed to once be the home of a race of marine titans. The waters surrounding Elshava are perpetually mist-shrouded and infested with sea serpents, and the water is frigid, causing any non-sea folk who fails a constitution check to get hypothermia. Since Elshava moves around, I would have to assume that this is a trait that the city causes somehow. Perhaps evidence that it really is a living being? Luckily, though, Elshava makes some very round boats that are essentially impossible to capsize, though outsiders find them difficult to maneuver. But the greatest city of the sea folk is Land Under Wave. Hardly any information is given about it aside from a rumor or two, which I take to mean that it's something of a hidden city. If not intentionally hidden, then at the very least one most travelers aren't going to find. But the sea folk are secretive, so I wouldn't put it past them to have a hidden city. The rumors say that it's an airy, domed wonder of gold, silver, and precious shells in gardens where the season is always spring. So it sounds like it's an underwater dome, but the inside of the dome isn't filled with water. Maybe something like Sandy's dome in SpongeBob. Land Under Wave is also said to be the home of the most powerful Selkie mages, so maybe this dome is a mythol. Kaledo is the realm of Poseidon, Greek god of the sea, storms, earthquakes, and horses. In Greek myth, Poseidon and Athena were both trying to become the patron deity of a great city, and they both offered gifts to win over the people. Poseidon created a spring, which at first the citizens were happy about, as it was a convenient source of water. However, when they tasted from the spring, they realized the water was salty and were displeased. In other versions of the myth, he offered them the first horse. In D&D's version of the story, he created a horse out of water. Athena, on the other hand, created the olive tree and gave it to the people. So they chose her, and the city was named Athens in her honor. Poseidon didn't like that, and so attempted to flood the city, as he's a rather vindictive god with a short temper, but he's also quick to forgive. His realm of Kaledo covers a wide area in Ossa, where the water is deeper than most of the rest of the realm, ranging from 3 to 300 feet deep in most areas. It's a beautiful realm comprised of a few small wave-racked islands, expansive kelp forests, magnificent coral reefs, and deep trenches that go far deeper than 300 feet, containing underwater cities of breathtaking splendor. The waters are warm and the creatures are friendly, so it's quite habitable, as long as you can breathe underwater. Though, of course, there are the sudden, violent storms to watch out for, which are some of the worst in the whole plane, but it's easier to ride them out underwater. There are other dangers, such as the extremely fast-moving currents and the krakens and leviathans that can be found in the depths. There are 3 main settlements in Kaledo. Corilla is a sea elf city in an ocean trench with gigantic arches that reach from the sea floor to 300 feet above the water. Pearldrop is a dolphin town of woven kelp shelters and warm, shallow waters. The dolphins are nomadic, so it's more of a bustling gathering place where dolphins are always entering and leaving, rather than a city with a permanent population. Cold Current is a Triton town in the very deepest part of the whole layer where the light doesn't reach, said to contain a portal to the elemental plane of water. It's built out of whale bones and the shells of deep-water clams, with an enormous temple to Poseidon. There's also the Isle of Mimos, a small series of tower-like islands that have been settled by air-breathers. Elavandor is the realm of Deep Sashalas, god of the Sea Elves. It's sometimes in the Sparkling Sea in Arvandor, and sometimes here in Ossa. But either way, Elavandor can always be reached through the Sparkling Sea by following a series of ever-widening underwater caverns that eventually lead you to the Great Chasm, where Deep Sashalas keeps his palace of coral, gold, and veined marble at the bottom of the trench. The water around his palace is always pure and blue, allowing the light to reach all the way to the depths, except for when his realm is about to move to the other layer, when the water starts to turn dark and grimy. Deep Sashalas is always improving his realm, building new islands, coral reefs, and undersea grottos. Unlike Poseidon's realm, Elavandor's waters are breathable. Well, as long as you're a good-aligned elf. The final layer of Arborea is Pelion, though the elves call it Mithardir, which means white dust, because it's a layer of blowing white sand, and possibly also snow, because it's not hot like you might expect out of a desert. It's actually temperate, but dust covers everything. Though, like the other layers, the weather is unpredictable and frequently dangerous. Lightning storms are common, and often whip up huge dust storms. The winds here are harsh, sometimes blowing the dust around at speeds capable of grinding bones to powder. This layer is largely an empty and desolated wasteland, with ancient, half-buried ruins and the bones of colossal creatures spread out here and there. The entire layer projects a sense of loss and emptiness, like a house that's been abandoned by its inhabitants. There are many stories about Pelion and what it once was. Some believe that this layer was once a great forest, home to giants and titans, much like the first layer. The elves believe Mithardir used to be ruled by the animal lords, but over time their land kept on cosmically realigning to the Beastlands, and so they moved their domains over to that plane until all that remained in this layer was these dust-covered Badlands. The Greeks believed that this layer was once the home of all the Egyptian gods, but their realms started to dwindle, and they abandoned Pelion in search of a more promising home, most of them eventually settling in Arcadia. Whatever the truth may be, some powerful civilization clearly used to be here long ago, and what remains of it is buried beneath the dust. And perhaps the Greeks have it right that the Egyptian gods used to call this home, as the only god that remains in the whole layer is Nephthys, Egyptian goddess of wealth and the dead. Nephthys is the former wife of Set, an evil god who resides in the Nine Hells, but she left him when he murdered Osiris. However, he still tries to win her back by regularly sending her gifts. Nephthys' realm is known as Amun-This, and she keeps a palace in the center of it. Amun-This is a large, mysterious, empty, wind-blown desert, avoided by all but the greediest of travelers, who explore the ruins that are occasionally revealed by the parting dunes. There's a real sense in Amun-This that there's always something lurking nearby, just out of sight. But despite this watchfulness, or perhaps it's a part of it, Amun-This is a slumbering realm, and all magic related to sleep is doubled in effectiveness, and all wealth here feels more splendid, such that it can be hard to tell that what's actually a useless trinket isn't some wondrous relic. While the realm has an empty feeling, it isn't completely devoid of life. There are animals that you'd expect to find in a desert, such as vultures and scorpions and lizards. The few plants of Amun-This are as white as the dust and are often spiny and brittle. There are also structures scattered throughout the dunes, such as temples, tombs, and necropoli. Amun-This is the Titans' graveyard, where they go when they feel death approaching. Some of them are so large that they look like mountains. Some have been hollowed out and have been turned into shelters, almost like ancient palaces half buried in the sand. And some of them form the foundations of the necropoli. The greatest of these necropoli is Bal Teref, a city of the dead inhabited by scavengers, jackals, ghosts, and rats. Many of the tombs of Amun-This are said to be the graves of dead gods, but finding the truth of the matter is difficult. For one thing, many of the clues have been lost to time, but for another thing, Amun-This is home to tribes of werebats, werehyena, werelion, and even werevulture bandits that roam the wastes, looking for easy targets. The largest settlement inhabited by the petitioners of Amun-This is called Scarab. It's a rather pathetic collection of white mud hovels close to Nephthys' palace. The citizens of Scarab, and the petitioners of Amun-This generally, are a suspicious lot, having been robbed or betrayed by bandits and treasure hunters too many times to count. Because of this, anyone who wishes to enter the city of Scarab must swear an oath of peace and honesty, or else be stoned and driven from the city gates. If you swear the oath and break your word, the oath-binding properties of Arborea are especially severe here, causing you to die of mummy rot within 24 hours. Amun-This is known for its taxidermy, cremation, and mummification, and they're well versed in the making of phylacteries, making it a good place to visit for those looking to become a lich. It's also known for its fine robes stitched with gold threads and dyed purples and scarlets. These are especially sought after by the sensates, though it's not often that they travel all the way here for them. Of course, Pelion is generally even harder to get to than Ossa, as there's even fewer portals here. However, in Sigel's Ditch, the body of water that forms the border between the Hive Ward and the Lower Ward, where people regularly dump corpses, there is a permanent portal that leads to Olympus. And that's the full tour of Arborea. I do wish that there was more to say about Ossa and Pelion, as they kind of seem like afterthought layers, and I also wish that there were more non-realm locations in the first layer, but maybe I should be grateful that there's not, because this video is already long enough. I never expected the video on Arborea to be this long, longer than the Abyss, but I guess that's what happens when there are two mega realms with like 20 gods each, and I want to provide a bit of information about all of them. And believe it or not, there's actually more I initially intended on saying about the Morality of Arborea that I ended up cutting. It seems like the trend on YouTube in recent years is the longer, the better. But I wonder, is there a point where it becomes too much? Maybe not. Patrician TV literally has a 12-hour-long video on Oblivion, and I've watched it. I'm not really trying to make my videos as long as possible. They could be longer. There's plenty more details that I could say, but I just don't deem to be important enough. I'm just trying to make my videos comprehensive. And if you want to help me with that, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. My supporters get access to update posts, ad-free videos, audio-only videos weeks before the full one, and they get their names at the end of my videos and the ability to vote on future videos. However, I don't think there will be a vote for the next video, because I already have a particular one in mind that will be a lot shorter than this, because I need a project that I can get done in less than 3 months. And if you want to show your support for what I do, but get something tangible out of it as well, then consider using code WadeAllen at dicenest.com for 15% off your order. But another way to show your support is by subscribing to my channel. That helps a lot too. But whatever you choose to do, thank you for watching.